You have just woken up as a snow leopard in the icy heights of the Himalayan mountains. For the next 3 hours, you are going to experience balancing on narrow cliff edges, hunting blue sheep through a whipping snowstorm, and even facing down a rival leopard, and this won't be easy, so good luck. But before we get into this journey of a snow leopard, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment on where you're tuning in from and what animal you want me to cover next. Now let's begin this epic adventure together. 4,800 meters above sea level, the world begins in silence. Not the quiet of your bedroom at dawn, but the profound, crystalline silence that only exists where the air is so thin it barely whispers. Here, on a granite ledge that juts out like nature's own diving board into the abyss, a shadow stirs. The shadow has a name, though no human tongue has ever spoken it. In the language of scent and territory, of claw marks on stone, and the particular way morning light catches rosette patterns, this shadow is known. But for now, let's call her what she is, a snow leopard, and she's about to show you what it means to be alive at the top of the world. The first thing that hits you up here isn't the cold, though trust me, we'll get to that. It's the light. As the sun crests the eastern peaks, it doesn't just rise, it erupts. Amber light spills across granite spires like honey poured over broken glass, and suddenly the world is painted in shades of gold and rose that would make a sunset jealous. This isn't Instagram lighting, friends. This is the high Himalayas deciding to show off. Our leopard stretches, and even this simple movement is a masterpiece of evolution. Every muscle fiber has been fine-tuned by millions of years of natural selection to work in air so thin that you or I would be gasping like fish on dry land. Her blood carries more red cells than yours, packed tight like rush-hour commuters, each one grabbing precious oxygen molecules and holding on for dear life. She yawns, revealing canine teeth that could punch through your winter coat like it was tissue paper, and takes her first real look at the valley below. This is the morning survey, the daily intelligence briefing that means the difference between eating and starving in a place where your next meal might be days away. The valley spreads out beneath her like a rumpled blanket, all ridges and folds and hidden places where prey might shelter. She's looking for movement, for the telltale flash of blue-grey that means barrel, blue sheep, or the distinctive bounce of an ibex picking its way across impossible slopes. Her eyes, adapted for distance and motion, can spot a mouse moving at 500 meters. Up here, that kind of vision isn't just handy, it's survival. But she's not just looking. She's reading the morning like you might read the newspaper, gathering information about weather patterns, wind direction, the condition of the snow. See how her nostrils flare. She's tasting the air, analyzing chemical signatures that tell stories of who passed this way in the night, what they ate, whether they were healthy or sick, afraid or confident. The wind carries scents like a gossip network. The musky signature of a male baral who marked a rock outcrop 2 valleys over. The stress hormones of a pika colony that spotted an eagle yesterday afternoon. The faint but unmistakable trace of another snow leopard who crossed this ridge 3 days ago and left the olfactory equivalent of a calling card. Temperature is dropping as altitude sucks the warmth from everything, and she feels it in her bones. Not uncomfortably, her fur is a marvel of engineering that would make the finest down jacket weep with envy, but she feels it. The cold changes how sound travels, makes scents more volatile, affects how snow will behave under her paws. All of this gets processed in the background of her mind, like your phone updating apps while you sleep. She stands, padding to the very edge of the precipice, with the casual confidence of someone who has never known a world with safety rails. The drop below her is the kind that would make professional climbers break out in a cold sweat, but she barely glances down. This is her highway, her neighborhood, her office with a view. From up here, she can see the ancient paths worn into the mountainside by generations of hoofed feet. Migration routes older than human civilization snake through passes and around cliff faces, invisible to casual observers but clear as road signs to predator eyes. She's memorizing traffic patterns, noting which routes look freshly used, which have been abandoned, where the best ambush points might be. The wind shifts, bringing news from the north, storm clouds building behind the next ridge, maybe 6 hours out. Weather moves fast up here, and what starts as a pleasant morning can turn deadly by afternoon. She files this information away with the precision of a meteorologist, because in her world, getting caught in the wrong place when weather turns isn't just inconvenient, it's potentially fatal. Her stomach reminds her that it's been 36 hours since her last real meal. Hunger isn't panic up here, it's just another piece of data to factor into the day's decisions. She can go weeks without substantial food if necessary, but why suffer when there might be opportunities below? The sun climbs higher, and the morning survey is complete. She's identified 3 potential hunting areas, noted the weather forecast, checked in with the neighborhood social network via scent, and assessed her own condition. All systems are go for another day of being apex predator in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. Time to move. The mountain is waking up, and there's work to do. Thin air breath balance on precipice. What you're about to witness defies everything your brain thinks it knows about gravity, safety, and the basic physics of not falling to your death. Our snow leopard approaches what climbers would call a knife-edge ridge, a section of rock so narrow that it's barely wider than her paw pads, with 1,000-meter drops on both sides that would give an eagle vertigo. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't check her equipment or test the route or say a quick prayer to the mountain gods. She simply steps onto what amounts to a tightrope made of granite and ice, 4 kilometers above sea level, and begins to walk across it like she's strolling through her living room. The secret isn't just in her paws, though they are miraculous things. Each paw is like a Swiss Army knife, designed by evolution, broad enough to distribute weight over loose scree, flexible enough to grip tiny irregularities in rock faces, and equipped with semi-retractable claws that can find purchase on surfaces smoother than your kitchen counter. The pads are covered in fur that acts like biological tire treads, providing grip on ice that would send you sliding into the abyss. But the real magic happens with her tail. Forget everything you think you know about cat tails being decorative accessories. This tail is 3 feet of dynamic balance equipment, a biological gyroscope that makes adjustments 50 times per second as she navigates terrain that would challenge a trained acrobat with safety gear and a support team. Watch how she moves. Each step is deliberate, calculated, placed with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. Her center of gravity stays perfectly aligned over her paws, her spine flowing like liquid as she compensates for irregularities in the rock. When a gust of wind tries to push her sideways, the tail swings out as a counterbalance, making micro-adjustments that keep her planted on stone no wider than your smartphone. The air up here has its own personality, and it's not particularly friendly. At this altitude, oxygen molecules are spread so thin that every breath delivers about 60% of the life-giving gas you'd get at sea level. Your body would be screaming for air, your heart hammering like a techno beat, your vision starting to blur at the edges. She takes it in stride, literally. Her blood is different from yours in ways that matter up here. More red blood cells packed into every drop, each one designed to grab oxygen molecules and hold them tight. Her heart beats slower than yours, but more efficiently, each contraction delivering maximum bang for the buck. Her lungs process what little air there is with the efficiency of a high-performance engine. Halfway across the ridge, she pauses. Not from exhaustion or doubt, but because something has caught her attention. A scent, carried on the wind from the valley below. Her nostrils flare as she analyzes the chemical signature, baral definitely, but young ones, possibly separated from the main herd. The kind of opportunity that makes risking this particular shortcut worthwhile. But first, she has to finish the crossing, and the second half of the ridge presents new challenges. Ice has formed overnight where moisture condensed and froze, creating a surface as slippery as glass. For you or me, this would be game over. Time to call mountain rescue and hope they can recover our bodies before the ravens do. She adjusts her gait, each paw placement now involving tiny claw extensions that bite into the ice like natural crampons. Her weight distribution shifts subtly, her spine curves a fraction more, her tail makes constant minute adjustments. It's like watching a masterclass in physics, taught by someone who never studied physics but understands it in her bones. A section of ice shifts under her front paw, and for a heartbeat, she's off balance. This is where most creatures would panic. where instinct would take over and wild thrashing would send them tumbling into empty air. Instead, she flows. Her back paws grip harder, her tail whips out for balance, her shoulders adjust, and she recovers with a grace that makes Olympic gymnasts look clumsy. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of approaching weather. She can smell storm clouds building, taste the electricity in the air that precedes lightning. This ridge, already dangerous, becomes downright suicidal when lightning starts looking for the highest, most exposed target in the landscape. Time to pick up the pace. She completes the crossing in a fluid sequence of movements that look effortless but represent millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning. Every muscle fiber, every nerve pathway, every instinctive response has been shaped by the simple rule that up here, perfect balance equals survival, and imperfect balance equals becoming a cautionary tale that other leopards tell their cubs. Safely across, she pauses on solid ground and looks back at the ridge she just conquered. Not with pride or relief, those are human emotions, but with the calm satisfaction of a professional who's just completed another day at the office, an office that happens to be one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The scent trail of those young Baral is stronger now, more recent. Time to investigate. Ice-filled footfalls tracking blue sheep. Snow tells stories, if you know how to read it. To you, it might look like a blank white page, but to our leopard, it's a library full of information written in tracks, scent trails, and the subtle disturbances that mark the passage of life through this frozen landscape. She's found something interesting, fresh Baral tracks, crisp and clear in snow that fell less than 6 hours ago. Not just any tracks either. These belong to young animals, their hoofprints smaller and more closely spaced than adults, pressed into the snow with the slightly unsteady gait of creatures still learning how to navigate terrain that would challenge a mountain goat. The story begins to unfold as she examines the scene with the methodical attention of a detective at a crime scene. 3 juveniles, probably 6 to 8 months old, moving northeast along the ridge. The depth of their tracks tells her they're well-fed, healthy, carrying the winter fat that should keep them alive until spring grass emerges from beneath the snow. But here's where it gets interesting. The spacing between tracks suggests they were moving faster than normal, not the leisurely pace of animals grazing their way across the mountainside, but the slightly hurried gait of creatures with somewhere to be, or something to avoid. She lowers her nose to the tracks, breathing in the complex chemical signature left behind. Baral's scent is distinctive, musky, herbivorous, tinged with the particular mineral tang that comes from animals whose diet consists entirely of high-altitude grasses and shrubs. But there's something else here, fainter but unmistakable. Stress hormones. These young Baral were anxious about something. Following the trail, she reads their story in the snow-like chapters in a book. Here they pause to investigate something, probably a patch of wind-blown grass poking through the snow. The tracks cluster together, showing how they scraped and dug, their small hooves creating divots in the frozen ground. They fed for maybe 10 minutes before something spooked them. The tracks resume, but now they're different. Longer strides, deeper impressions, the unmistakable signature of animals that have shifted from casual foraging to purposeful movement. They're heading for the traditional winter shelters, caves and overhangs where Baral have weathered storms for millennia. She follows the trail as it winds between granite outcrops and around icy slopes, her own paws silent on snow where theirs crunched and squeaked. This is where her hunting technique begins to diverge from the big cats you might be familiar with. Lions charge across open savanna, tigers burst from jungle cover, snow leopards play a longer game. The Baral migration patterns are as predictable as commuter traffic, because up here there are only so many routes that don't end in death. Generations upon generations of blue sheep have worn these same paths, seeking the same sheltered valleys, the same wind-protected grazing areas, the same caves that offer refuge from storms. She knows these patterns like you know the route from your house to the grocery store. More than that, she knows the shortcuts, the alternate routes, the places where prey animals are forced to move through narrow passages or across exposed ground. She's not just following these particular Baral, she's thinking several moves ahead, calculating where they're likely to go and where she might intercept them. The scent trail grows stronger as she climbs, telling her she's gaining ground. The stress hormones in their tracks are more pronounced now, suggesting they know they're being followed. Baral aren't stupid. Millions of years of evolution have fine-tuned their ability to detect predators, and somewhere in their primitive brains, alarm bells are ringing. But knowledge and ability to act on that knowledge are different things. These are juveniles, not yet fully experienced in the deadly game of high-altitude hide-and-seek. They're following instinct more than experience, heading for safety but not necessarily taking the smartest route to get there. She pauses at a section where the tracks show clear signs of hesitation. The barrel stopped here for several minutes, their hoofprints churning up the snow as they debated which way to go. Two routes were available, a longer but safer path that stays high on the ridge, and a shorter route that descends into a narrow ravine before climbing back up to the winter shelter sites. They chose the shortcut. Prey animals always choose the shortcut when they're stressed, seeking the quickest route to safety without fully considering the tactical implications. It's a mistake that evolution hasn't quite bred out of them, probably because it works often enough to keep the species alive, even if it occasionally leads to situations like this one. She knows where that ravine leads. More importantly, she knows that there's a spot about halfway through where the walls close in, where Baral are funneled through a passage barely wide enough for their bodies, where the acoustics are such that any sound echoes and amplifies, making it impossible to hear an approaching predator. It's the kind of natural trap that snow leopards dream about. She abandons the trail and begins moving cross-country, taking a route that will bring her to the ravine ahead of her quarry. The hunt has officially begun, and the rules of engagement have shifted from tracking to tactical positioning. Time to show these young Baral why evolution gave snow leopards such extraordinary patience. Stealth shadows, slow-motion stalk. What you're about to witness is a masterpiece of biological engineering in action. Forget everything you've learned about hunting from nature documentaries, where big cats explode from cover in dramatic bursts of speed and fury. This is different. This is hunting as meditation, predation as performance art, violence as ballet. She's positioned herself on a rocky outcrop overlooking the ravine, maybe 30 meters above where she knows the Baral will emerge. The wind is perfect, blowing from them to her, carrying their scent while masking her own. The sun angle is ideal, casting shadows that break up the distinctive rosette pattern of her coat until she becomes just another patch of light and dark on the granite. The waiting begins. Her breathing slows to almost nothing, each breath measured and deliberate. Her heart rate drops until it's barely detectable, entering a state that's part hibernation, part yoga, part predatory focus, so intense it borders on the supernatural. Every system in her body is shifting into hunting mode, a biological state that exists nowhere else in nature. 20 minutes pass, then 30. You would be fidgeting, checking your phone, wondering if maybe the Baral took a different route. She becomes the mountain itself, so still that the pikers in the nearby rocks resume their activities, convinced that whatever they glimpsed moving earlier must have been a shadow or a trick of the light. Then she hears it, the distant scrape of hooves on stone, the soft whoosh of breath in thin air, the barely audible rustle of winter fur against wind. The Baral are coming, following the trail exactly as she predicted, moving with the urgency of animals that know predators exist but haven't yet learned to trust their instincts completely. She begins to move, and this is where the magic happens. Every step is planned, calculated, executed with precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep. Her paws find the exact spots where stone meets stone with no loose pebbles to shift or scrape. Her weight distribution changes continuously, flowing from paw to paw like water finding the path of least resistance. The juniper scrub provides perfect cover, its twisted branches and dense needles breaking up her outline until she's less cat than collection of moving shadows. She flows through the vegetation like smoke, disturbing nothing, leaving no sign of her passage except the faintest trace of scent that the wind immediately carries away. Her muscles begin to coil, each fiber tensing with controlled power. This isn't the explosive preparation of a sprinter, but the sustained readiness of a loaded spring. She could hold this position for hours if necessary, every system primed for action but held in perfect check until the moment demands release. The Baral are closer now, their voices carrying up from the ravine bottom. young animals still learning the discipline of silence that keeps you alive in the high places. They're chattering to each other in the way of creatures that haven't yet learned that in the mountains, sound carries forever and everything is listening. She adjusts her position by millimeters, reading the wind, calculating trajectories, running through the biomechanics of the strike she's planning. The distance is 15 meters of vertical and maybe 20 horizontal, a leap that would be impossible for most predators. But she's not most predators. Her tail becomes perfectly still, no longer needed for balance but coiled like part of the spring mechanism that's about to unleash. Her ears rotate independently, triangulating on the sounds below while staying alert for any changes in the acoustic environment that might signal danger or opportunity. The frost beneath her paws is brittle, each crystal sharp enough to cut, cold enough to burn. But her paw pads are adapted for this, tough enough to handle the punishment, while sensitive enough to detect the tiniest irregularities in the surface. She positions each paw with the precision of a surgeon placing sutures. Her breathing becomes so shallow it's barely happening. In air this thin, even the sound of respiration can carry, and she's close enough now that the Barrel might hear the soft whistle of air through her nostrils. Every biological process that isn't essential to the hunt has been temporarily suspended. The sun shifts slightly, and a new shadow pattern emerges. She flows into it like Mercury finding a new container, her coat adapting to the changed light conditions with evolutionary camouflage that took millions of years to perfect. Against the mottled granite and scattered juniper, she's invisible until the moment she chooses not to be. Below, the first Baral emerges into her field of view, young, healthy, completely unaware that death is watching from above with golden eyes and infinite patience. It's followed by its companions, 3 juveniles moving in the loose formation of animals that feel safe because they haven't learned better yet. She selects her target, the trailing animal, slightly separated from the others, positioned where her strike won't be impeded by rocky outcrops or vegetation. Every predator calculates these angles instinctively, but she does it with the precision of a mathematician and the patience of a saint. The moment approaches. Every system in her body reaches peak readiness. Muscles coiled, reflexes primed, trajectory calculated, timing synchronized with heartbeat and breath, and the ancient rhythm of hunter and hunted that has played out in these mountains since the ice first carved them from living stone. The Barrel takes another step forward into the kill zone. Snowflake, ambush, the powerful lunge, time fractures. The world explodes into motion. She launches herself from the granite ledge with the controlled violence of a lightning strike, her body becoming a projectile guided by millions of years of evolutionary engineering and split-second calculation. This isn't just jumping, this is ballistic flight with intent to kill. 12 meters through mountain air that's so thin it barely exists, her trajectory a perfect arc that intersects with the path of the trailing Baral in exactly 3.5 seconds. Her legs extend fully, transforming her into something between a missile and a flying mountain cat, claws extending like organic grappling hooks. The Barrel looks up just as her shadow passes overhead. For a fraction of a heartbeat, their eyes meet, predator and prey sharing a moment of perfect understanding about how this is going to end. The Baral's mouth opens, probably to bleat a warning, but sound travels slowly at this altitude, and there isn't time. She strikes with precision that would make a guided missile jealous. Her front paws connect with the Baral's shoulders, claws punching through winter fur and into muscle like organic pitons finding purchase in granite. The impact transfers her full momentum into the smaller animal. 45 kilograms of snow leopard moving at maximum velocity, meeting 30 kilograms of Baral that suddenly understands why evolution gave it such strong legs for running. But there's nowhere to run. Her jaws clamp down on the base of the Baral's skull with crushing force calibrated to the millimeter. This isn't random violence. It's surgical precision developed over countless generations of predators who learned that in the high mountains, you get one chance at a kill and you'd better make it count. Too low and you miss the vital structures. Too high and you might slip off. Exactly here, at the junction of skull and spine, and the game is over in seconds instead of minutes. The Barral's companions scatter like leaves in a storm, their hooves throwing up sprays of snow and ice as they bound away across terrain that would challenge a professional climber. But they're safe now. She has what she came for, and snow leopards are ambush predators, not pursuit hunters. The chase phase of this hunt lasted approximately 4 seconds, from launch to successful kill. The adrenaline hit is spectacular. Her pupils dilate until her eyes are nearly black. Her heart rate spikes to levels that would put a human in cardiac arrest. Every nerve ending in her body lights up like a Christmas tree. This is the evolutionary payoff for all those hours of patient stalking, all that calculated positioning, all that perfectly controlled violence. But she's not celebrating. Professional predators don't gloat, they secure the kill and get to safety before something bigger comes to investigate the commotion. The mountains are full of scavengers who would happily steal a meal from a snow leopard if they thought they could get away with it, and the sound of hooves on stone carries far in the thin air. She tests her grip on the Barral, making sure the kill is clean and complete. The last thing she needs is wounded prey, attempting escape while she's trying to secure her prize. But her technique was flawless. The Barral's spine separated cleanly at the first cervical vertebra, death instantaneous and irreversible. Now comes the hard part, getting her prize to safety. 45 kilograms of snow leopard can kill 30 kilograms of Barral, but carrying that same 30 kilograms across broken terrain at altitude is a different challenge entirely. The mathematics of predation aren't just about making the kill, they're about making the kill somewhere you can defend it long enough to actually eat it. She begins the process of repositioning her grip, working her jaws from the kill bite to a carrying hold that will let her transport the carcass without exhausting herself. This involves some anatomical knowledge that would impress a veterinarian, which bones can support weight, which joints will bend in useful directions, how to balance a load that weighs 2/3 as much as she does. Her adrenaline is already beginning to fade, replaced by the methodical focus of a predator who knows that the hunt is only half the battle. Now comes the feast, but first comes the transport, and before that comes the security assessment that will determine whether this kill gets eaten in peace or becomes an expensive gift to the local scavenger community. She lifts the Barral's body, testing different grip positions until she finds one that distributes the weight properly. Snow leopards are astonishingly strong for their size. Pound for pound, they're among the most powerful cats on Earth. But even they have limits, especially at altitude where every breath is precious. The sun is climbing higher, and she can smell weather changes on the wind. Storm clouds are building behind the northern peaks, maybe 4 hours out, bringing wind and snow that will make travel difficult and tracking nearly impossible. If she's going to find a secure dining spot, it needs to be soon. Time to disappear into the maze of granite and ice that these mountains call landscape, carrying her prize to somewhere safe enough to truly enjoy the rewards of perfect execution. The hunt is over. The feast is about to begin. Quiet aftermath. Feast in solitude. She's found the perfect spot, a narrow gully carved between 2 granite slabs, sheltered from wind and hidden from the eyes of competitors who might want to discuss sharing arrangements. This is her private dining room, complete with natural stone walls and a view that most restaurants would kill for. The Barral lies before her, still warm despite the sub-zero air temperature. Steam rises from the carcass in thin wisps that dissipate quickly in the dry mountain atmosphere. To you, this might look like a grisly scene, but to her, it's the successful culmination of everything evolution designed her to do. She begins with ritual precision that's been refined over millions of years of feline feeding behavior. First, the grooming, cleaning blood and debris from her fur, with methodical licks that also serve to calm her post-hunt adrenaline. Her tongue is rough enough to strip meat from bone, but gentle enough to arrange each guard hair back into perfect insulating position. The feeding process starts with the fur. This isn't some savage tearing apart of the carcass, it's systematic harvesting that would impress a butcher. She plucks guard hairs and undercoat with surgical precision, creating small piles of discarded fur that the wind immediately begins to scatter. Birds will use this material for nest building, and nothing in the high mountains goes to waste. Her technique reveals itself as she works. Each bite is calculated, each movement purposeful. She's not eating randomly, she's following a feeding strategy that maximizes nutrition while minimizing waste. The liver first, packed with vitamins and minerals that are scarce in the high-altitude environment. Then the heart, rich in taurine and other compounds essential for feline metabolism. Between bites, she pauses to scan her surroundings. Feeding is when predators are most vulnerable, focused on their meal instead of watching for threats. Her ears rotate constantly, monitoring the acoustic environment for approaching footsteps, wing beats, or the telltale sounds of other predators who might want to negotiate a change in ownership of this particular carcass. The muscles come next, sectioned away with precision that speaks to anatomical knowledge gained through countless similar meals. She knows exactly where to bite to separate meat from bone, which joints will yield easily, and which require more pressure. Her jaws generate crushing force that could break your femur, but she applies it with the delicacy of a surgeon. This is where the mathematics of high-altitude survival become clear. A barrel this size represents about a week's worth of calories, but she can't eat it all at once. Her stomach, adapted for feast or famine cycles, can only hold so much at one time. The rest needs to be cached, hidden away from scavengers who patrol the mountains looking for exactly this kind of opportunity. She feeds until her belly is comfortably full, not stuffed, because that would make her sluggish and vulnerable, but satisfied in a way that settles deep into her bones. The first real meal in 36 hours, and the relief is almost visible as tension drains from her shoulders and her breathing deepens into the rhythm of an animal that no longer needs to hunt. But the work isn't done. Snow leopards are meticulous cachers, and she begins the process of preparing the remainder of the carcass for storage. This involves moving it to an even more secure location, wedging it between rocks where ravens can't reach it and ground-dwelling scavengers can't drag it away. The sun is warming the air enough that she needs to think about preservation. In winter, the mountains are nature's refrigerator, keeping meat fresh for days if it's properly stored. But warm afternoons can start decomposition processes that will spoil her investment in hunting energy. She covers the cached carcass with loose stones and snow, creating a natural refrigeration system that will keep her meal fresh until she's hungry enough to return. The hiding place is memorized with the kind of spatial precision that would impress a GPS system. Snow leopards remember cache locations with accuracy that can navigate them back to stored food weeks later. The immediate area gets a thorough cleaning. Blood on snow creates visual and scent signatures that advertise recent kills to every scavenger within kilometers. She scrapes snow over stained areas, scatters the discarded fur piles, and generally erases as much evidence as possible that anything interesting happened here. Her grooming becomes more thorough now, cleaning away every trace of blood and meat particles that might create scent trails for competitors to follow. This isn't vanity, it's operational security. A clean predator is an invisible predator, and invisibility is what keeps you alive in the high places. Finally, she settles into the contented drowsiness that follows successful feeding. Her metabolism is shifting into digestion mode, heart rate slowing, muscles relaxing, the satisfied exhaustion of an animal that has successfully completed one of evolution's most challenging tasks. Time for a nap in the mountain sunshine, belly full, cache secure, and nothing to do but let biology handle the conversion of Baral into snow leopard energy. Life is good at the top of the world. Ghost of the cliffs, territory patrol. Every snow leopard is the CEO of a corporation called Survival, and like any good executive, she needs to make regular inspections of her holdings. Territory isn't just the place where she lives, it's her hunting grounds, her safe houses, her highway system, and her early warning network all rolled into one invisible empire carved from granite and sky. The boundaries of her domain aren't marked with fences or signs, but they're as real as any human property line. They exist in the language of scent marks and claw scratches, in the accumulated memory of which ridgelines offer the best hunting and which valleys provide shelter from storms. Her territory encompasses roughly 30 square kilometers of some of the most challenging terrain on Earth, and she knows every stone of it. She begins her patrol at the eastern boundary, where her domain meets that of another snow leopard, whose scent signature she knows as well as her own reflection. This neighbor is an older female, probably past her prime breeding years, who maintains the uneasy détente that exists between non-competing predators in areas where prey is scarce enough that cooperation sometimes makes more sense than conflict. The boundary marker is a distinctive granite outcrop that offers panoramic views in 3 directions. It's been used by snow leopards for generations, maybe centuries, worn smooth by countless paws and marked with layer upon layer of scent signatures that tell the history of territorial arrangements dating back beyond memory. She approaches the rock with the diplomatic caution of an ambassador entering neutral territory. Fresh scent marks tell her that her neighbor passed this way less than 12 hours ago, heading north toward the winter ibex grounds. The chemical signature carries information about health, reproductive status, recent diet, and general mood, a biological business card that updates automatically with each territorial patrol. Her response is measured and appropriate to the diplomatic protocols of mountain predators. She adds her own scent mark to the rock, not covering or challenging the existing signature, but alongside it. This is the olfactory equivalent of initiating diplomatic relations, acknowledging boundaries while asserting continued presence and good health. The patrol route follows ridgelines and natural highways that have been used by snow leopards since the species first adapted to high-altitude hunting. These aren't random paths. They're carefully chosen routes that provide maximum visibility, optimal scent dispersal points, and strategic positions for monitoring prey animal movements. Each landmark holds memories layered like geological strata. This overhang is where she sheltered during the storm that lasted 3 days last spring. That cliff face is where she made her first solo kill as a juvenile, learning the hard way that hunting isn't just instinct but skill refined through practice and failure. The narrow ledge system ahead is her highway through terrain that would challenge technical climbers with full equipment. She pauses at a cluster of scratching posts, trees and rock faces marked with claw marks that serve multiple functions in snow leopard society. Territory marking, yes, but also claw maintenance, stretching posts for keeping hunting muscles flexible, and communication nodes where information gets exchanged in the chemical language of territorial predators. Her claws extend as she adds fresh scratches to the existing network of marks. Each scratch carries meaning, depth indicates strength, placement shows reach and size, freshness establishes timeline of occupation. It's graffiti with purpose, vandalism that serves vital survival functions in a landscape where loneliness isn't romantic solitude but potential death sentence. The southern boundary presents different challenges. Here, her territory borders that of a younger male whose scent signatures suggest aggressive territorial behavior and possibly poor impulse control. The markers here are more numerous, more emphatic, carrying the chemical equivalent of shouting matches about property rights and resource access. She responds with calculated restraint, marking without overmarking, asserting presence without escalating what could become a dangerous territorial dispute. Male snow leopards are larger and stronger, but territory disputes are expensive in calories and injury risk that no predator can afford. Better to maintain boundaries through demonstration of continued occupation than through physical confrontation. Weather patterns encoded in scent marks tell stories about seasonal movements and resource availability. That pine tree marked 5 days ago carries the signature of stress hormones that suggest poor hunting success. The rock outcrop ahead shows evidence of multiple visits during the storm cycle, indicating it served as emergency shelter for animals pushed off their preferred routes. Her mental map updates continuously as she moves through familiar territory, seeing it with fresh eyes. That avalanche scar is new since her last patrol, completely changing the hunting dynamics of the lower valley. The ibex path that used to follow the creek bed has been diverted around fresh rockfall, creating new opportunity zones where prey animals might be more vulnerable to ambush. The patrol is also inventory management, checking on cached food supplies hidden throughout her territory. Some caches are untouched, still viable for future meals. Others show signs of scavenger activity or spoilage, their contents written off as losses that come with the territory of being apex predator in a landscape where nothing stays hidden forever. The western boundary requires the most careful attention, because this is where her territory overlaps with human activity. Herder paths cross her hunting grounds, and the scent signatures tell complex stories of interspecies interaction. Yak trails, dog scent, human footprints, and the acrid smell of cooking fires create a mosaic of information that requires careful interpretation. She moves through this borderland with extra caution, reading the signs that tell her when humans were last in the area, what routes they're using, whether their livestock is being moved through her hunting grounds. This isn't paranoia. It's practical intelligence gathering for an animal whose survival depends on avoiding conflicts that nobody wins. The patrol circuit takes most of the morning to complete, but when she returns to her starting point, she carries a comprehensive update on the state of her empire. Boundaries are secure, cache inventory is current, neighbor relations are stable, and the intelligence picture shows no immediate threats to territorial integrity. Time to move on to other aspects of snow leopard property maintenance. Sage-scented wind scent marking rituals. If snow leopards had social media, scent marking would be their Facebook, Twitter, and dating app all rolled into one invisible network that spans the entire mountain ecosystem. What looks like random animal behavior is actually sophisticated chemical communication that would impress information technology specialists. She approaches a windswept ridge where sage bushes release their aromatic oils into the thin mountain air. This isn't just scenery, it's prime real estate in the scent marking economy, where natural fragrance amplifies and carries chemical messages across vast distances. The sage acts like a biological cell tower, boosting signal strength and extending range. Her first marking is what ethologists call a cheek rub, though that clinical term doesn't capture the purposeful intensity of the behavior. She presses the scent glands in her cheeks against granite surfaces, depositing chemical signatures that contain more information than your average social media profile. The chemical cocktail she's releasing includes compounds that identify her as an individual, indicate her current health status, reveal her reproductive condition, and even provide updates on her recent diet. Other snow leopards reading these marks will know not just who left them, but when and whether the marker was stressed, confident, hungry, or satisfied. But the really sophisticated communication happens with what researchers delicately call urine marking, though that barely describes the complexity of the process. She backs up to a carefully selected rock face and sprays with the precision of a graffiti artist working on a masterpiece. The placement isn't random. She's choosing surfaces and angles that will maximize the persistence and broadcast range of her message. The chemistry involved would fascinate a biochemist. Snow leopard urine contains volatile compounds that evaporate at different rates, creating a time-release information system. Fresh marks smell different from day-old marks, which smell different from week-old marks. The chemical degradation rate acts like a timestamp, telling other leopards exactly when the marking was made. Her tail position during marking isn't coincidence either, it's communication amplification. Tail held high indicates confidence and territorial assertion. Tail held low suggests caution or submission. The tail position affects spray angle and droplet distribution, creating different scent signatures that carry different social meanings. Between marking sites, she pauses to investigate existing marks left by other leopards. This is where the communication network reveals its sophistication. She's not just reading who was here and when. She's analyzing emotional states, health conditions, and social intentions encoded in chemical messages that have been refining themselves for millions of years. A mark from the neighboring female carries stress hormones indicating poor hunting success. The chemical signature suggests the neighbor hasn't fed well in several days, information that might influence territorial boundary negotiations or hunting ground usage patterns. Cooperation becomes more likely when everybody's struggling to find prey. Another mark, this one from the young male whose territory borders hers to the south, carries a different kind of information. High testosterone levels, compounds associated with aggressive territorial behavior, and chemical signatures that suggest he's been successful in recent hunts. This translates to proceed with caution, maintain boundaries, avoid confrontation. But scent marking isn't just about big-picture territorial politics, it's also personal maintenance, like updating your status to let friends know you're alive and well. She leaves marks that will be readable by any snow leopard passing through for the next several weeks, each one a small autobiography written in molecules. The timing of marking behavior follows patterns that would interest social anthropologists. More frequent marking during breeding season, when territorial boundaries become more fluid and cooperation needs to be balanced against competition. Increased marking intensity during food shortages, when resource competition requires more assertive boundary enforcement. Weather affects the communication network in ways that influence marking strategies. Wind direction determines how far scent molecules will travel and in which directions. Humidity affects how long marks remain detectable. Temperature influences the rate at which chemical compounds break down. She factors all of this into her marking decisions like a telecommunications engineer optimizing signal transmission. The sage-scented ridge becomes a message board where multiple leopards have left updates over the past several weeks. Reading the accumulated marks is like scrolling through a neighborhood social network, catching up on who's been where, what they've been doing, and how they're feeling about life in the high places. Her marking session concludes with what researchers call phlegm response, that distinctive facial expression where she curls back her lips and breathes in deeply through specialized scent organs. This isn't just smelling, it's chemical analysis that processes information with the sophistication of a laboratory spectrometer. The invisible network is updated, her social media status is current, and the neighborhood communication system continues its ancient function of keeping isolated predators connected across vast distances. Time to move on, but the messages she's left will continue broadcasting her presence and status long after she's disappeared into the granite landscape. Aerial watch, golden eagle passing. The shadow passes overhead with the kind of authority that makes even apex predators look up and take notice. Golden eagles in the high Himalayas aren't just birds. They're aerial sovereignty made manifest, rulers of an airspace that extends from ground level to altitudes, where even snow leopards fear to tread. She pauses on her granite ledge, amber eyes tracking the raptor's flight path with the professional interest of one apex predator acknowledging another. This isn't fear. Snow leopards don't have many natural enemies once they reach adult size, but it's respect, the kind that exists between specialists who understand each other's capabilities. The eagle banks into a thermal, riding invisible columns of warm air with efficiency that would make aerospace engineers weep with envy. Its wings barely move, just minute adjustments to feathers that redirect airflow and maintain perfect lift in atmosphere so thin that helicopters struggle to operate. This is mastery of three-dimensional hunting territory that spans hundreds of square kilometers. From her position, she can observe the eagle's hunting strategy unfold in real time. Those telescopic eyes, 8 times more powerful than human vision, are scanning the landscape below for the telltale movement that indicates prey. Pikas scurrying between rocks, marmots venturing too far from burrow entrances, young baral that haven't yet learned to watch the sky as carefully as they watch the ground. The food web dynamics playing out above her head are complex enough to fuel doctoral dissertations. Golden eagles and snow leopards occupy different hunting niches in the same ecosystem, but their territories overlap in ways that create both competition and unexpected cooperation. Eagles can spot prey from distances impossible for ground-based predators, but they can't always access it. Snow leopards have the killing power, but lack the aerial reconnaissance. Sometimes, the relationship becomes temporarily symbiotic. Eagles circling over an area often indicate prey concentrations that might interest ground hunters. Conversely, snow leopard kills sometimes provide scavenging opportunities for birds that normally hunt live prey. It's not friendship, it's ecological mathematics that occasionally produces mutual benefit. The eagle adjusts its flight pattern, circling lower now, attention focused on something in the valley below that has triggered its hunting reflexes. She follows its gaze, using the bird's superior visual acuity as biological binoculars to identify potential opportunities in her own hunting territory. There, a small herd of boral picking their way across exposed slopes, visible from the air but hidden from her current ground position by intervening ridges. The eagle's reconnaissance is providing intelligence that might influence her own hunting decisions later in the day. This is interspecies information sharing that neither party consciously planned, but both benefit from. The social dynamics between eagles and snow leopards reveal themselves in moments like this. Mutual respect without direct competition, because their hunting strategies occupy different temporal and spatial niches. Eagles hunt during daylight hours when thermal currents provide optimal flight conditions. Snow leopards prefer dawn, dusk, and nighttime when their superior night vision gives them advantage over prey species. The eagle's presence also serves as an early warning system for changes in weather patterns. Birds that spend their lives reading air currents and atmospheric pressure changes often detect incoming storms hours before ground-based animals notice shifting conditions. Its flight behavior provides meteorological intelligence that helps inform decisions about shelter and hunting timing. She watches as the eagle completes its reconnaissance pass and continues northward toward territories beyond her usual range. The brief interspecies encounter ends as casually as it began, two apex predators acknowledging shared mastery of the high places before returning to their respective hunting priorities. But the intelligence gathered during those few minutes of observation will influence her behavior for the rest of the day. The barrel location, the weather indicators read in the eagle's flight patterns, the reminder that she shares this ecosystem with other highly successful predators, all of this gets filed away in the mental database that keeps snow leopards alive in conditions that defeat most other life forms. The eagle disappears beyond the northern peaks, but its shadow has left invisible marks on the hunting landscape. Information transferred between species that have learned to read each other's behavior patterns across millions of years of coevolution. Time to put that intelligence to use. High alpine Nap rock shelter respite. The overhang she's chosen is architecture by geology, carved from granite by wind and weather over geological timescales that make human civilization look like a brief experimental phase. 3 meters deep, sheltered from the prevailing winds. With sightlines that command the approach routes, this is 5-star accommodation by snow leopard standards. She settles into the contented sprawl of a predator whose immediate needs are met. Belly full from the morning's barrel feast, territory patrolled and boundaries secure, scent marking communications updated. Time for the kind of restorative rest that keeps apex predators operating at peak efficiency. The physics of staying warm at altitude would challenge a thermodynamics engineer. Air temperature is 15 degrees below freezing, wind chill pushes it down another 10 degrees, and the granite beneath her radiates cold like a geological heat sink designed to suck warmth from anything foolish enough to contact it directly. But she's a walking masterpiece of insulation technology. Her fur is a dual-layer system that would make the designers of high-end outdoor gear insanely jealous. The outer guard hairs repel moisture and break wind, while the dense undercoat traps warm air in millions of tiny pockets that create a microclimate around her body. Each guard hair is hollow, filled with air that provides additional insulation while keeping weight minimal. The undercoat is so dense that water can't penetrate to her skin even when she's walking through deep snow. The combination creates a thermal barrier so effective that snow doesn't melt when it lands on her back. Her paws are biological engineering marvels wrapped in natural wool socks. Fur grows between her toes and covers her paw pads, providing traction on ice while insulating against cold that would give you frostbite in minutes. Blood vessels in her extremities are arranged in counter-current heat exchange systems that warm incoming arterial blood without going venous blood, preventing heat loss through circulation. Sleep at altitude presents challenges that lowland mammals never face. Oxygen levels that would leave humans dizzy and confused become the baseline for rest and recovery. Her respiratory system continues operating at efficiency levels that maintain brain function and muscle repair while consuming minimal energy reserves. Her sleep cycles are different from yours, adapted for an environment where deep unconsciousness could mean death if threats emerge without warning. She enters what biologists call vigilant rest, a state where muscle tension relaxes and metabolic processes slow down, but sensory awareness remains partially active. One ear stays tuned to the acoustic environment, monitoring for sounds that don't belong, approaching footsteps, rockfall, or the distinctive wing beats of scavenger birds that might indicate other predators in the area. Her nose continues processing scent molecules that drift past the shelter entrance, running chemical analysis for anything that might require immediate attention. The mountain environment provides its own white noise, whined through granite formations, the distant crack of ice shifting in hidden crevasses, the occasional rockfall as freeze-thaw cycles gradually reshape the landscape. These familiar sounds become an audio backdrop that actually enhances rest by masking potentially alarming noises that might trigger unnecessary alertness. Her body temperature regulation becomes a precisely controlled system during rest periods. Core temperature stays constant while extremities are allowed to cool slightly, reducing overall energy expenditure while maintaining vital organ function. Blood flow redirects toward essential systems, creating efficiency improvements that extend the value of stored calories. Dream states in snow leopards remain mysterious to researchers, but her muscle twitches and eye movements suggest neural activity that might represent hunting sequence rehearsal or spatial memory consolidation. Perhaps she's mentally reviewing the morning's successful barral hunt, reinforcing the neurological pathways that made precision timing and trajectory calculation possible. The afternoon sun shifts position, and warming granite begins radiating stored heat that turns her shelter into a solar-powered recovery chamber. The temperature differential between sunny and shaded surfaces can be dramatic at altitude, and she's positioned herself to take advantage of passive solar heating without exposing herself to wind or aerial surveillance. Snow continues falling outside, but the flakes are small and dry, the kind that indicates stable weather patterns rather than incoming storm systems. The acoustic signature of precipitation on stone tells her that conditions remain favorable for extended rest periods without weather-related emergency responses. Her metabolic processes shift into repair and recovery mode. Hunting success means her body can devote energy to muscle maintenance, immune system function, and the cellular repair processes that keep apex predators operating at peak efficiency. This is when microscopic damage from extreme physical exertion gets fixed and strength gets rebuilt for future hunting challenges. Time moves differently during high-altitude rest, marked not by clocks but by the slow progression of shadows across granite faces and the gradual shift in wind patterns that indicates changing weather systems. She could stay here for hours, but she won't. Energy conservation is balanced against territorial maintenance needs and hunting opportunity assessment. The mountain sleeps, and so does its most successful predator. Thunder in the gorge, mountain storm. The first warning comes as pressure in her ears, a sensation that makes them twitch involuntarily as atmospheric conditions shift in ways that humans can barely detect. Barometric pressure is dropping fast, the kind of rapid change that turns mountain weather from scenic backdrop into survival emergency in the space of minutes. She lifts her head from the warm granite where she's been resting, immediately alert to danger signals that have been refined by millions of years of evolution in environments where weather kills quickly and without warning. The sky overhead still shows patches of blue, but her sensory systems are reading atmospheric conditions that won't become visible to human eyes for another hour. The wind changes direction, carrying scents from weather systems brewing beyond the northern peaks, ice crystals, ozone, and the distinctive electrical smell that precedes lightning storms at altitude. Storm clouds are building in atmospheric layers invisible from ground level, but their chemical signatures travel faster than the visual evidence of their formation. She rises and begins moving immediately. Mountain storms don't announce themselves with gradual build-up. They explode into existence with violence that can trap and kill unprepared animals in minutes. The shelter that served perfectly for an afternoon nap becomes a death trap when lightning starts looking for the highest, most exposed targets in the landscape. The first drops of precipitation arrive as she's picking her way down the granite face toward lower ground. Not rain. These are ice pellets that strike stone with sharp clicking sounds that echo off cliff faces like biological Morse code. Hail in the mountains starts small but grows fast as storm systems gain energy and violence. Thunder rolls through the valleys with a sound like the earth itself cracking open. At sea level, thunder is impressive. At altitude, where sound travels differently through thin air and reflects off granite surfaces in complex patterns, thunder becomes a physical force that seems to shake the mountains from their foundations. She moves with the urgent efficiency of an animal whose survival depends on reading weather patterns correctly. Every snow leopard carries ancestral memories of storms that killed, encoded in behavioral patterns that trigger immediate responses to specific atmospheric conditions. This isn't panic, it's emergency protocol activation. The hail intensifies, ice stones now large enough to bruise even through her dense fur. She seeks cover under a granite overhang, but this is temporary shelter only. Lightning strikes at altitude follow patterns that make exposed ridges and isolated overhangs into electrical attractors that channel millions of volts through granite that conducts electricity better than most people realize. Lightning illuminates the valley in stark, colorless flashes that reveal a landscape transformed. What was scenic mountain terrain 30 minutes ago has become a war zone where ice falls like artillery and electrical discharge turns the air itself into weapon. The gap between lightning and thunder shrinks with each strike, indicating the storm center is moving directly overhead. Her body temperature regulation faces its greatest challenge. Hypothermia becomes a real threat when ice water penetrates fur systems designed for dry snow. Wet fur loses most of its insulating properties, and the combination of wind, moisture, and sub-freezing temperatures creates conditions that can kill through heat loss faster than starvation. She presses deeper under the granite shelter, but even here, safety is relative. Rockfall becomes a secondary threat as ice impacts loosened stone fragments that have been held in place by frost and friction. The mountain itself becomes unstable when storm systems introduce forces that exceed the structural limits of naturally balanced rock formations. The storm's acoustic environment is overwhelming, hail striking stone, thunder reflecting off cliff faces, wind screaming through granite formations with sounds like banshees. In this chaos, the normal auditory warning systems that keep predators alive become useless. Approaching threats could be invisible until they're close enough to touch. Her metabolic systems shift into emergency mode, burning stored calories to maintain core temperature, while storm conditions threaten to overwhelm her biological heating systems. This is expensive energy expenditure, at a time when hunting becomes impossible and cached food supplies might be buried under ice accumulation. Lightning strikes a ridge less than a kilometer away, the electrical discharge so close that the air smells of ozone and burned stone. The thunder follows almost instantly, a sound that seems to come from inside her bones rather than from the external environment. At this range, electromagnetic effects can disrupt nervous system function in ways that temporarily impair coordination and judgment. The hail reaches maximum intensity, ice stones large enough to seriously injure, falling with terminal velocity that turns them into organic ammunition. She pulls her tail around her body like a fur scarf, protecting the extremities that are most vulnerable to ice damage and hypothermia. Time becomes measured not in minutes but in survival decisions. When to move to better shelter, when staying put becomes more dangerous than exposure to ice bombardment, when the risk of lightning strike exceeds the risk of hypothermia. These calculations happen automatically, informed by instincts that have kept her species alive in the world's most dangerous weather. The storm reaches its peak and begins to move on as quickly as it arrived. Mountain weather systems are intense but typically brief, their violence constrained by the same atmospheric conditions that make them so dangerous. The hail diminishes to small pellets, then stops. Lightning moves off toward distant peaks, thunder fading into echoes that bounce between valleys. But the aftermath presents new challenges. Ice accumulation has made familiar terrain treacherous, and temperature drops that follow mountain storms can freeze wet fur into biological armor that impairs movement. The recovery phase of mountain weather emergencies often kills more animals than the storms themselves. Time to assess damage and begin the careful process of returning to normal operations in a landscape that's been temporarily transformed into alien territory. Shivering dusk, adaptive camouflage. As light fades from the storm-washed peaks, the mountains transform into a study in monochrome that would challenge the world's best photographers. The landscape becomes an infinite palette of grays: granite gray, snow gray, shadow gray, storm cloud gray, and she becomes invisible. This is where millions of years of evolution reveal their masterpiece, a coat pattern so perfectly adapted to broken light and granite textures that she disappears while standing in plain sight. Her rosettes aren't just decoration, they're biological camouflage technology that breaks up her outline and matches her perfectly to the mottled patterns of weathered stone and scattered snow. The physics of her camouflage operate on multiple levels that would fascinate optical engineers. Her base coat color shifts subtly with the seasons, lighter in winter when snow dominates the landscape, darker during summer when exposed rock and vegetation create different background patterns. Individual guard hairs contain varying concentrations of melanin that create the complex color gradations her camouflage requires. But the real magic happens with what biologists call countershading, dark rosettes on a lighter background that break up her silhouette in ways that confuse depth perception. When she's motionless against granite formations, her pattern merges with natural stone textures so completely that other animals can look directly at her without recognition. She demonstrates this now as a small herd of Baral picks its way across the slope below her position. These are the same animals whose ancestors have been evading snow leopard predation for millions of years, creatures whose survival depends on spotting camouflaged threats before they become lethal. Yet they graze within 50 meters of her position without showing any awareness of her presence. The Baral have their own evolutionary adaptations for threat detection: eyes positioned for maximum peripheral vision, ears that rotate independently to monitor acoustic environments, group behavior patterns that assign sentinel duties to individuals while others feed. But her camouflage defeats visual detection systems that evolution has refined across geological timescales. Light conditions work in her favor as dusk approaches. The blue-gray light that precedes darkness creates atmospheric conditions where color discrimination becomes difficult and contrast resolution drops to levels that favor camouflaged predators. This is the hunting hour, when her visual advantages become most pronounced relative to prey species. Her movement patterns enhance the camouflage effect. When she does move, it's in a flowing sequence that mimics natural phenomena: wind moving through grass, snow shifting on rock faces, shadows changing as clouds pass overhead. Her gait eliminates the distinctive predator movement patterns that trigger prey-animal alarm responses. Even her breathing becomes part of the camouflage system. Vapor from exhaled breath could create visible clouds in the cold air, but she breathes through her nose in patterns that minimize vapor formation while maximizing oxygen extraction from thin air. Each breath is controlled, measured, planned to avoid creating visual signatures that might break her invisibility. The rosette patterns on her coat are individually unique, like fingerprints, but they follow mathematical principles that create optimal camouflage across varied terrain types. Computer analysis of snow leopard coat patterns reveals fractal geometries that match natural granite formations with precision that suggests evolutionary fine-tuning across thousands of generations. Her tail, nearly as long as her body, serves multiple camouflage functions beyond balance and warmth. When wrapped around her body, it breaks up her outline and creates visual confusion about her actual size and shape. The bushy tip can be positioned to mimic natural objects: windblown grass, small rocks, patches of snow, that further enhance her invisibility. Behavioral camouflage works alongside physical adaptations. She positions herself where background patterns match her coat design, using terrain features to break up any visual elements that might reveal her presence. Rock shadows, snow patches, and granite textures become extensions of her natural camouflage system. The Baral below continue feeding, occasionally lifting heads to scan for threats but failing to detect the perfectly camouflaged predator watching from above. Their evolutionary detection systems are sophisticated, but her evolutionary concealment systems have stayed one step ahead in the biological arms race that defines predator-prey relationships. As darkness approaches, her camouflage advantages shift but don't disappear. Night hunting requires different concealment strategies, but her coat patterns continue to provide advantages in moonlight and starlight conditions where visual detection remains possible. The transition from day to night hunting modes happens seamlessly as lighting conditions change. Temperature drops as solar heating disappears, and her fur responds by increasing loft, trapping more air for insulation while maintaining the visual properties that make her invisible. Form follows function in biological systems, but sometimes function can be optimized for multiple purposes simultaneously. The last light fades from the western peaks, and she prepares to shift into nocturnal hunting mode. Day camouflage becomes night camouflage as her visual advantages evolve to match changing conditions. The Baral below settle into nighttime alertness patterns, but they're still looking for a predator they can't see coming. Time to put her invisibility to productive use. Moonlit, calm, night patrol. The Milky Way explodes across a sky so clear it seems you could reach up and pluck stars like fruit from a cosmic tree. At this altitude, with no atmospheric pollution or light contamination for hundreds of kilometers, night doesn't just fall, it reveals the universe in all its overwhelming glory. She moves through this celestial theater with the confidence of an animal perfectly adapted for darkness. Her pupils have dilated to capture every available photon, transforming her amber eyes into biological light amplification devices that make night vision equipment seem primitive by comparison. The enhanced tapetum lucidum behind her retinas, the same structure that makes house cats' eyes glow in headlights, reflects and concentrates available light with efficiency that multiplies her visual acuity by 6 times compared to human night vision. Moonlight becomes as useful as daylight for navigation and hunting in terrain that would leave humans stumbling blindly. Her whiskers extend forward like biological radar arrays, sensitive enough to detect air currents deflected by obstacles in complete darkness. These aren't just facial hair, they're precision instruments that can sense objects without direct contact, map terrain through air pressure changes, and even detect the breathing patterns of nearby animals. The acoustic environment at night reveals layers of information invisible during daylight hours. Without wind noise and thermal air currents that mask sounds during daytime, every footstep, breath, and heartbeat becomes audible to ears evolved for precision audio detection. The mountains become a 3-dimensional sound map, where location, distance, and threat assessment happen automatically. Pika colonies in the rockfall zones continue their activities well past sunset, their territorial squeaks carrying clearly in the thin air. These small relatives of rabbits serve as an early warning network for the entire ecosystem. Their alarm calls indicate approaching predators, weather changes, or any disturbance that threatens their underground cities. She pauses to listen as a pika alarm call echoes across the valley from the north. Something has disturbed the colony up there, but the acoustic signature suggests it's not another snow leopard. Different pitch, different urgency pattern. Probably a fox or marten hunting smaller prey, but the information gets filed away for future reference. Musk deer paths crisscross the nighttime landscape, like invisible highways marked by scent trails that persist for hours in the cold, still air. These secretive deer are primarily nocturnal, and their movement patterns provide intelligence about terrain conditions, weather changes, and the general ecosystem health that affects all predator species. Her night patrol follows routes optimized for acoustic and visual surveillance, ridgelines that provide maximum sight distance under available starlight, wind patterns that carry scent information from multiple directions, and terrain features that offer quick escape routes if unexpected threats emerge from the darkness. The temperature has dropped to levels that would kill humans through hypothermia in hours, but her circulation system maintains perfect core temperature while allowing extremities to cool slightly for energy conservation. Blood vessels in her legs and paws use counter-current heat exchange to minimize heat loss while maintaining function. A distant sound catches her attention, the distinctive grunt-wheeze call of barrels settling into nighttime positions. The herd she observed earlier has moved to night shelter sites, probably rocky alcoves that provide protection from wind and potential predators. Their location is noted and filed for future hunting consideration. Her own scent marking becomes more important during night patrols. Darkness limits visual territory marking options, so chemical communication takes precedence. She adds fresh scent marks to strategic locations, updating the neighborhood communication network with information about her continued presence and current status. The night sky serves as both compass and calendar for animals that navigate by celestial reference points. Star positions indicate direction and season, while moon phases provide timing information for behaviors that synchronize with natural cycles. She's not consciously using astronomy, but millions of years of evolution have encoded stellar navigation into instinctive behavioral patterns. Hunting opportunities emerge from the darkness like gifts from the night gods. A young ibex, separated from its herd and moving nervously across exposed terrain, presents a potential target. But the approach angle is wrong, the escape routes favor the prey, and patience remains more valuable than immediate action. Wind patterns carry information from valleys and peaks beyond her visual range. Scent molecules from distant territories tell stories about prey concentrations, competitor movements, and weather systems that might affect hunting conditions over the next several days. Night becomes a time for intelligence gathering that informs decisions across much longer time horizons. Her whiskers detect subtle air movements that indicate large animals moving in the darkness several hundred meters away, too distant for visual identification, but the displaced air patterns suggest baral or ibex moving between feeding and resting areas. The information gets logged for pattern analysis that might reveal behavioral routines exploitable during future hunts. The cold intensifies as radiative cooling draws heat from every exposed surface into the vacuum of space. Even her magnificent fur coat faces its limits when temperatures drop to levels that challenge basic biological functions. Strategic movement keeps circulation active while avoiding unnecessary energy expenditure. Night patrol concludes as she returns to familiar territory with a comprehensive intelligence update. Prey locations, competitor activities, weather patterns, and territory status all logged and analyzed. The darkness has revealed information invisible during daylight hours, filling gaps in the tactical picture that determines hunting success in the world's most challenging predator environment. Dawn is still hours away, but the night's work continues. Echoes of competition snow leopard interloper. The sound cuts through mountain silence like a blade through silk, a yowl that carries the unmistakable signature of another snow leopard, but not one whose voice belongs in this territory. This is an intruder, and the acoustic analysis happening in her brain categorizes threat level, approximate age, gender, and emotional state in the seconds it takes for the sound to echo off granite walls. Male, definitely. Young adult, probably around 4 years old based on the pitch and resonance patterns. Confident, which means either inexperienced or genuinely formidable. The call came from the eastern boundary of her territory, close enough to represent immediate territorial challenge, far enough away that she has time to plan her response. She answers with a call of her own, not the aggressive roar you might expect, but a complex vocalization that combines territorial assertion with information gathering. Snow leopard communication operates on frequencies and patterns that carry detailed messages across the vast distances that separate solitary predators in mountain environments. Her call serves multiple functions. It announces her presence and territorial claim, indicates her size and condition through acoustic signatures that can't be faked, and demands identification from the intruder. In the language of mountain predators, she's essentially asking, "Who are you? What do you want? And are you prepared to fight for it?" The response comes quickly, which tells her the intruder isn't backing down from the challenge. His return call carries acoustic signatures that make her mental threat assessment jump several levels. This voice belongs to an animal in prime condition, confident in his abilities, and not particularly concerned about territorial boundaries that don't happen to be his own. Chemical analysis through her specialized scent organs adds layers to the intelligence picture. The wind carries pheromone signatures that provide biological profiling more detailed than fingerprints. High testosterone levels indicate breeding condition and increased aggression. Stress hormone markers are low, suggesting this isn't a desperate animal driven by starvation or territorial displacement. This is worse than desperation. This is calculated territorial expansion by a predator who believes he can win whatever conflict might develop. She begins moving toward the source of the calls, but her approach strategy is complex, informed by evolutionary understanding of snow leopard combat that has refined itself across millions of years. Direct confrontation is expensive in calories, injury risk, and territory disruption. Better to gather intelligence first, then decide whether negotiation, intimidation, or actual fighting offers the best odds of successful conflict resolution. The terrain between her current position and the intruder's location provides multiple approach routes with different tactical advantages. High ground offers visual surveillance but increased exposure. Valley approaches provide concealment but limit escape options. Ridge lines optimize speed but telegraph movement to opponents with superior position sense. She chooses a route that balances information gathering with tactical flexibility, moving through terrain that allows her to observe the intruder while maintaining multiple options for escalation or retreat. Snow leopard territorial disputes can escalate from vocal challenge to lethal combat in seconds, and preparation determines survival. The acoustic exchange continues as she moves, each call providing additional intelligence about the intruder's location, movement patterns, and tactical intentions. His calls suggest he's moving deeper into her territory rather than maintaining position at the boundary. This is either supreme confidence or potentially fatal miscalculation. Her own vocalizations shift subtly in response, incorporating threat frequencies that indicate escalating territorial assertion. The mountain acoustics amplify and modify these sounds, creating echo patterns that experienced snow leopards can read like topographical maps. Sound becomes a weapon system that operates on psychological as well as acoustic levels. Scent marking intensifies as she moves through her territory toward the confrontation zone. Fresh marks over existing ones create chemical signatures that advertise recent presence, good health, and territorial determination. These aren't just biological graffiti, they're psychological warfare designed to influence opponent decision-making. The intruder's scent trail crosses hers at multiple points, indicating he's been exploring her territory for some time before announcing his presence. This suggests either reconnaissance for territorial takeover or evaluation of resource availability that might justify the risks of territorial challenge. Either interpretation indicates serious intent rather than accidental boundary crossing. Her metabolic systems begin shifting into combat readiness. Heart rate increases, adrenaline production ramps up, muscle systems prepare for explosive action. But this isn't panic response. It's controlled preparation that maintains peak performance while avoiding energy waste through premature stress reactions. The calls are getting closer now, and acoustic analysis indicates the intruder has stopped moving and is waiting for her approach. This could be confidence, tactical preparation, or recognition that continued advance into defended territory crosses lines that lead inevitably to physical confrontation. The next few minutes will determine whether this territorial dispute gets resolved through diplomatic posturing or escalates into the kind of combat that can reshape territorial boundaries and population dynamics across the entire mountain. Ecosystem. Time to meet the challenger face to face. Paw-print diplomacy, silent standoff. They see each other simultaneously across 50 meters of broken granite, two apex predators whose lives have suddenly become focused on a single question: who owns this particular piece of mountain real estate? For a moment that stretches like elastic time, neither moves, both calculating odds that will determine whether this confrontation ends in negotiated withdrawal or territorial combat. He's impressive, she has to admit. Large for a male snow leopard, probably pushing 50 kilograms, with the broad shoulders and thick neck that indicate both good genetics and successful hunting career. His coat shows the scars that mark experienced mountain predators, healed claw marks from territorial disputes, the distinctive parallel lines that indicate close encounters with prey animals that fought back. But she's not intimidated. 45 kilograms of female snow leopard in prime condition, defending territory she knows like her own heartbeat, carrying the confidence that comes from successful hunting and unchallenged territorial control for the past 3 years. Size matters in predator confrontations, but experience and territorial advantage can level odds that initially favor larger opponents. They begin the ritual dance of threat assessment that determines whether diplomatic solutions remain possible or whether this escalates to physical confrontation. Each movement, each posture change, each shift in ear position carries meaning in the complex language of predator body communication. He takes 2 steps forward, testing her response to territorial advance. She mirrors the movement, matching his assertiveness while maintaining defensive positioning that keeps escape routes open. Neither wants this fight. Territorial combat is expensive in calories, injury risk, and potential mortality, but neither can afford to appear weak. His tail position shifts from neutral to slightly elevated, indicating increased arousal and potential aggressive intent. Her tail responds with subtle movement that maintains readiness without escalating threat display. These microcommunications happen automatically, informed by millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning in species where misreading social signals can mean death. The standoff enters its critical phase as both animals assess opponent capabilities through visual inspection that amounts to biological forensic analysis. Muscle tone, coat condition, scar patterns, movement fluidity, every observable characteristic gets evaluated for clues about fighting ability, recent hunting success, and overall health status. His approach strategy reveals tactical thinking that worries her. Instead of the direct advance that might indicate inexperience or desperation, he's moving to cut off her access to high ground that would provide defensive advantages. This suggests either natural tactical intelligence or previous experience in territorial combat. She counters by shifting position toward terrain features that complicate his advance while maintaining her own tactical options. Rocky outcrops provide cover and concealment, while narrow passages force single-file movement that negates his size advantage. Terrain becomes weaponized in conflicts between animals that understand landscape as three-dimensional tactical environment. The psychological warfare intensifies as both animals engage in threat displays designed to avoid actual combat through intimidation. His ears flatten slightly, pupils dilate, shoulders bunch with muscle tension that advertises explosive potential. These aren't conscious decisions, they're autonomic responses, hardwired into predator confrontation behavior. Her response is measured, controlled, designed to communicate strength without unnecessary provocation. She matches his threat indicators while maintaining postures that indicate confidence rather than fear. The message she's sending, prepared to fight if necessary, but not seeking combat for its own sake. Communication shifts from visual to vocal as low-frequency growls begin rumbling from both animals. These sounds operate below the threshold of human hearing but carry emotional and physical information that other snow leopards can interpret with precision. Vocal threat assessment becomes another layer in the complex negotiation determining whether violence becomes necessary. The standoff reaches maximum tension as both animals achieve full threat display, ears back, pupils dilated, muscles coiled, vocal cords producing subsonic frequencies that would make your bones vibrate if you could hear them. This is the moment when diplomatic solutions either succeed or fail catastrophically. Then something shifts in his posture that suggests recalculation of risk versus reward ratios. Perhaps the realization that she's not going to back down. Perhaps recognition that territorial disputes with prepared defenders rarely end well for challengers. Perhaps simple acknowledgement that this particular piece of real estate isn't worth potential death. His retreat isn't dramatic. Snow leopards don't do face-saving gestures or dramatic exits. He simply steps backward, tail position shifting to neutral, threat displays diminishing in increments that signal de-escalation without loss of dignity. The message is clear: territorial challenge withdrawn, boundaries acknowledged, conflict avoided. She maintains position until he's moved beyond immediate threat range, then begins her own de-escalation sequence. Muscle tension releases gradually, threat postures fade, breathing patterns return to normal. But alertness remains high. Territorial agreements reached through intimidation require verification through actual departure. The confrontation ends as abruptly as it began, two shadows disappearing into granite landscape without bloodshed, injury, or territorial boundary changes. Diplomatic victory achieved through biological negotiations that avoided costs neither animal could afford to pay. Time to reinforce territorial boundaries and ensure the message about ownership remains clear to future challengers. Screefall, chaos, escape and pursuit. The retreat might have ended peacefully, but mountain terrain has its own opinions about conflict resolution. As the male snow leopard backs away across a scree field, loose rock fragments balanced in geological equilibrium that's lasted centuries, his rear paw displaces a single stone no larger than your fist. Physics takes over with the inevitability of gravity. The small stone strikes another, which shifts against a third, which disturbs the precisely balanced matrix of rocks that have been holding each other in place through friction and mutual support. What engineers call catastrophic failure begins with a sound like glass breaking, then escalates into geological chaos that transforms stable ground into a river of stone moving at lethal velocity. She reacts with reflexes that save her life in the first half second of the rock slide. The sound of shifting stone triggers instant emergency responses hardwired into every mountain animal. Jump away from the danger zone before conscious thought has time to process what's happening. Her legs launch her sideways and upward in a trajectory that carries her away from the expanding collapse zone. But the male isn't as fortunate. Caught in the center of the scree field when the failure initiated, he's now riding a tsunami of loose rock that's accelerating down the mountainside with him tumbling somewhere in the chaotic mass of moving stone. His survival depends on reflexes, luck, and the kind of athletic ability that evolution refined specifically for situations like this. She watches from her precarious safety position as the rock slide reveals its devastating power. Thousands of tons of granite fragments, some the size of refrigerators, others small as marbles, all moving together in a destructive symphony that drowns out every other sound in the valley. The geological stability that took millennia to establish disappears in seconds. The scree field becomes a living thing, flowing like water but hitting like concrete, carrying everything in its path toward the valley bottom with momentum that could flatten trees if any existed at this altitude. The male's dark form appears and disappears in the chaos, sometimes on top of the flow, sometimes buried beneath tons of moving rock. Her own position isn't secure. The rock slide is expanding beyond its original boundaries as the failure propagates through adjacent unstable areas. Slopes that looked solid 5 seconds ago are beginning to shift and crack as the vibrations from the main slide destabilize additional rock formations. The entire mountainside could be reorganizing itself. She begins moving, not running, because panicked movement on unstable terrain usually ends in additional casualties, but flowing from secure point to secure point with the precision of an animal that understands mountain geology at an instinctive level. Each step is tested before committed, each handhold verified before trusted. The male emerges from the rock slide flow like a resurrection, somehow finding purchase on stable rocks while chaos continues around him. His athletic ability under impossible conditions would impress Olympic gymnasts, leaping from moving stone to moving stone, using momentum and balance to stay ahead of the crushing force that could flatten him instantly. But he's injured. The slight favor in his left rear leg and the way he's holding his right shoulder indicate impact damage that compromises his escape ability. Mountain terrain doesn't forgive weakness, and a disabled predator becomes prey for gravity, weather, and opportunistic scavengers. The geological violence begins to subside as the unstable rock reaches equilibrium in new positions lower on the mountainside. The sound diminishes from earthquake intensity to the occasional crack and rumble of final adjustments. The landscape has been permanently altered, drainage patterns changed, travel routes eliminated, territorial boundaries redrawn by forces beyond any animal's control. Dust clouds obscure visual assessment of damage and casualties. The air fills with granite particles that make breathing difficult and create atmospheric conditions that limit visibility to a few meters. This is when injured animals often make fatal mistakes, moving too quickly through terrain they can't properly evaluate. She maintains position until atmospheric conditions clear enough for accurate threat assessment. The male's location is unknown, possibly buried under tons of rock, possibly escaped to areas beyond her visual range, possibly injured and hiding somewhere in the debris field. Each possibility requires different tactical responses. When the dust finally settles, the damage is impressive. The scree field has been completely reorganized, with some areas swept clean down to bedrock, while others now support rock piles that change the entire topography of this section of mountain. Travel routes that existed for centuries have been erased, replaced by obstacles that will require entirely new navigation strategies. The male is nowhere visible, which could mean successful escape, concealment under protective overhangs, or burial under geological forces that respect neither predator status nor territorial agreements. The mountain has imposed its own solution to their diplomatic standoff, demonstrating that in high-altitude environments, terrain itself is the ultimate authority. She begins the careful process of route finding through landscape that's been fundamentally altered. The rock slide has created new challenges and opportunities, unstable areas that must be avoided, fresh hiding places that might shelter prey animals, changed drainage patterns that will affect seasonal animal movements. Mountain geology writes its own rules, and survival depends on reading them correctly. River of cloud, crossing the glacial pass. Noon sun transforms the morning's devastating rockslide into distant memory as she faces a different kind of geological challenge. Before her stretches a glacial pass that connects her territory with hunting grounds beyond the watershed, a highway carved by ice over thousands of years, but one that demands payment in risk and energy from everything that dares to cross it. The glacier tongue extends like a frozen river flowing in geological slow motion between granite peaks that rise like cathedrals on either side. From above, it looks deceptively peaceful, a smooth white surface that suggests easy travel conditions. The reality becomes apparent only when you're close enough to see the cracks. Crevasses split the glacier's surface in patterns that would challenge professional mountaineers with ropes and rescue equipment. These aren't simple cracks. They're gaping wounds in the ice that extend down into blue-black depths where falling objects disappear without echo. Some crevasses are obvious, visible as dark lines against white ice. Others hide beneath thin snow bridges that could collapse under her weight. She approaches the glacier with the methodical caution of an animal whose survival depends on reading ice conditions correctly. Each step onto the frozen surface is tested first, weight distributed carefully, escape routes planned before commitment. Glacier travel isn't just dangerous, it's a specialized skill that requires understanding ice physics, weather effects, and the acoustic signatures that indicate structural stability. The ice responds to her paws with sounds that tell stories about internal structure and safety margins. Solid ice produces sharp clicks when struck. Thin ice over crevasses creates hollow drumming sounds. Snow bridges over gaps make soft, whooshing noises that indicate dangerous instability. Her ears become geological sensors that supplement visual inspection with acoustic analysis. Temperature matters critically on glacier surfaces. The midday sun has warmed the ice enough to make it slightly plastic, creating better traction for her fur-covered paws, but also increasing the risk of structural failure in marginal areas. Thermal expansion and contraction create stresses that can turn stable ice into collapse zones without warning. Her route across the glacier follows natural highways that experienced travelers learn to recognize. Compression zones where ice flows create reinforced surfaces, areas where crevasse patterns indicate solid ice beneath, natural bridges where ice thickness provides adequate safety margins. This is knowledge accumulated through generations of animals that survived glacier crossings by learning to read frozen water like terrain maps. The cloud river that gives this pass its name begins forming as she reaches the glacier's midpoint. Warm air rising from lower valleys meets cold glacier surfaces, creating fog systems that can reduce visibility to arm's length within minutes. Navigation becomes a matter of memory, compass sense, and the kind of spatial awareness that keeps mountain animals from walking off cliffs they can't see. Her paws begin to numb as glacier cold penetrates even her remarkable insulation systems. Ice contact creates heat loss that threatens circulation in extremities, and the combination of thin air and thermal stress challenges her metabolic systems in ways that require constant adjustment. Each step becomes a calculated balance between progress and preservation of biological function. Wind patterns on glacier surfaces create unique challenges that don't exist in other terrains. Katabatic winds, air currents created by temperature differentials between ice and surrounding rock, can reach velocities that knock animals off their feet without warning. Sound travels differently across ice, creating acoustic confusion that makes navigation by hearing unreliable. The crevasse field in the glacier's center section requires precise route finding that would challenge a GPS system. She picks her way between gaps that could swallow her entire body, testing each snow bridge before trusting it with her full weight, backtracking when routes prove impassable. This is three-dimensional puzzle solving at altitude while managing hypothermia risk. Her breathing creates vapor clouds that freeze instantly in the supercooled air above the glacier. Each exhalation becomes visible evidence of her presence, but also heat loss that she can't afford to sustain indefinitely. Breathing patterns adjust to minimize vapor formation while maintaining oxygen supply to muscles working at maximum efficiency. The glacier reveals its history through ice layers visible in crevasse walls, annual accumulation bands that record weather patterns stretching back centuries. Volcanic ash layers from eruptions that occurred before human civilization, atmospheric composition changes that document climate variations across geological timescales. She's walking across a library of environmental history, written in frozen water. Navigation landmarks disappear and reappear as fog density varies with thermal conditions. Rock formations that provided reference points vanish into white-gray obscurity, then emerge ghost-like from different directions than expected. Spatial awareness becomes critical when visual references prove unreliable and wrong turns can lead to crevasse fields or dead-end routes against impassable ice walls. The crossing reaches its most treacherous section where glacier movement has created a maze of intersecting cracks and unstable ice blocks. Here, route selection becomes life-or-death decision-making where wrong choices lead to falls that no animal survives. Each step requires analysis of ice conditions, structural engineering assessment, and backup planning for potential emergency situations. Her progress slows to careful deliberation as she navigates through glacier terrain that changes constantly under the influence of thermal cycles, gravitational stress, and the inexorable movement of millions of tons of ice flowing downhill at speeds measured in meters per year. The far side of the glacier appears through shifting fog like a promised land of solid rock and reliable footing. Time to complete this crossing before weather conditions deteriorate or thermal effects compromise ice stability beyond safe travel margins. Scarred membrane, older wounds and lessons. Safe on solid granite again, she pauses to groom ice crystals from her fur and assess the toll that glacier crossing extracted from her body systems. But the methodical licking of her right shoulder stirs memories encoded in scar tissue that tells stories about previous encounters with mortality in the high places. The shoulder scar is 3 years old, a parallel set of claw marks that nearly ended her hunting career before it fully began. She was younger then, less experienced in reading the body language of cornered prey, and the barrel ram that created these marks taught her lessons about desperation that textbooks could never convey. Mountain sheep in their final moments become weapons with hooves that can shatter bones and horns that can puncture vital organs. The ram's desperate charge had been perfectly timed, catching her in mid-leap when trajectory couldn't be adjusted and landing couldn't be controlled. 4 parallel gashes through fur, skin, and muscle, missing arteries by millimeters and ligaments by less. She survived that encounter, killed the ram despite her injuries, and learned about hunting wounded animals while being wounded herself. The scars remind her that even successful predation carries costs that compound over time, and that the margins between life and death in mountain hunting are measured in fractions of seconds and millimeters of placement. The grooming session becomes archaeological excavation, as she catalogues damage accumulated through years of high-altitude predation. Each mark tells stories about survival lessons learned through pain, experience bought with blood, and the gradual accumulation of knowledge that separates successful predators from those who become cautionary tales. A notch in her left ear marks an encounter with another snow leopard during her 2nd year of territorial establishment. That confrontation went beyond diplomatic posturing into actual combat, brief but savage, ending when both animals recognized that continued fighting would leave winners too damaged to enjoy their victories. Territorial boundaries got negotiated through violence, but survival required knowing when to stop. The missing tip of her tail, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it, commemorates a rockfall incident during her first winter as an independent hunter. Inexperience in reading geological stability nearly cost her everything as loose rocks created avalanche conditions that trapped her in a narrow ravine. The tail tip got crushed under stones too heavy to move. Requiring amputation, she performed herself with the surgical precision of desperation. But scars aren't just permanent damage, they're upgraded armor. The tissue that replaced her original skin in damaged areas is tougher, less sensitive to temperature extremes, more resistant to penetration. Her body has been rebuilding itself with each injury, creating biological improvements that enhance rather than diminish her capabilities. Weather forecasting becomes possible through scar tissue that responds to atmospheric pressure, changes with sensations that predict storm systems hours before they become visible. The shoulder claw marks ache when humidity rises. The ear notch tingles before temperature drops. The tail injury sends nerve signals that correlate with barometric pressure variations. These aren't random phantom pains. They're biological weather stations that provide meteorological intelligence more accurate than scientific instruments. Scar tissue contains nerve endings that respond to atmospheric conditions in ways that intact skin cannot, creating early warning systems that help predict environmental changes critical to hunting and survival. Her grooming ritual acknowledges each scar with the attention usually reserved for recent injuries. This isn't vanity, it's maintenance of biological systems that require care to function optimally. Scar tissue needs circulation to remain flexible, attention to prevent infection, and the kind of thorough inspection that detects problems before they become critical. The scars also function as territorial displays during encounters with other snow leopards. Battle damage indicates experience, survival ability, and the kind of determination that makes territorial challenges expensive for aggressors. Animals that have survived serious injuries and returned to full-function advertise capabilities that discourage casual confrontation. Memory patterns associated with each scar provide tactical intelligence that influences hunting strategies and territorial behavior. The shoulder injury reminds her to avoid frontal attacks on desperate prey. The ear notch reinforces lessons about conflict escalation and knowing when diplomatic solutions become impossible. The tail damage emphasizes geological awareness and terrain assessment skills. Pain memories fade, but learning persists in neural pathways that have been reinforced through survival experiences. Each scar represents knowledge purchased through suffering, expertise that can't be taught but must be learned through direct exposure to consequences. This is education in the University of Survival, where graduation requires living through final exams. The grooming session concludes with assessment of current condition relative to historical damage patterns. Her healing systems have performed admirably over the years, maintaining function despite accumulated trauma, adapting to limitations while finding alternative approaches that preserve essential capabilities. She stands, stretches muscles that have tightened during the geological survey of her own body, and resumes the business of being apex predator in conditions that test survival systems daily. The scars are permanent testimonials to resilience, reminders that success in the high places requires paying prices that leave marks on both body and memory. Time to continue writing the story that these scars document. Gentle nudge mating courtship calls. Spring arrives in the high Himalayas not with gentle warmth or flower blossoms, but with chemical messages that travel on mountain winds and trigger biological responses refined across millions of years of evolution. The breeding season has begun, and her body's chemistry is shifting into reproductive mode with changes that affect everything from hunting behavior to territorial tolerance. The first sign isn't visual or auditory, it's olfactory. Her scent production changes, releasing pheromone signatures that will travel for kilometers through thin mountain air, advertising her reproductive status to any male snow leopards within range. This isn't conscious decision-making, it's endocrine system automation that has taken control of chemical communication networks. Her territorial vocalizations shift from standard boundary maintenance calls to something more complex, sounds that carry reproductive information along with territorial data. These calls operate on frequencies that travel exceptionally well through mountain acoustics, designed by evolution to reach maximum range while carrying maximum information about the caller's location, condition, and availability. The response comes from 3 different directions over the course of the morning, indicating that her reproductive status has been detected by multiple males whose territories border or overlap with hers. Each answering call carries its own information, payload, age, condition, territorial status, and genetic fitness markers that allow her to evaluate potential mates before any physical encounters occur. Mate selection in snow leopards isn't the dramatic display behavior you might see in other species. There are no elaborate dances, no bright plumage, no contests of strength or endurance. Instead, there's sophisticated biochemical communication that allows evaluation of genetic compatibility, health status, and territorial viability without the energy expenditure and injury risk that physical courtship competitions would require. The nearest male's calls indicate he's approaching her territory from the north, moving carefully to avoid triggering defensive responses that might result in injury to potential breeding partners. His vocalizations carry reassurance signals that distinguish reproductive approach from territorial challenge, though the difference is subtle enough that miscommunication could escalate to violence. Her response calls become more frequent and specific, providing location information that guides his approach while establishing ground rules for interaction. The chemical and acoustic signals she's broadcasting basically translate to interested but cautious, healthy and fertile, approach slowly and announce intentions clearly. Mountain breeding protocols have evolved to minimize energy waste and injury risk during encounters between apex predators whose normal relationship involves territorial avoidance. The courtship process includes behavioral safeguards that prevent normal predatory responses from interfering with reproductive success. The male's approach reveals itself through scent markers he leaves along traditional courtship routes, paths used by snow leopards for generations to safely approach potential mates without triggering territorial defense. Responses. These routes typically follow neutral zones between established territories, allowing passage without direct boundary violations. His scent signature, analyzed through her specialized chemical detection systems, provides genetic compatibility assessment that operates below conscious awareness, but influences her receptivity to continued courtship interaction. Immune system markers, genetic diversity indicators, and health status information all get processed through olfactory analysis that determines reproductive viability. The breeding season represents temporary suspension of normal territorial rules, but this suspension requires careful negotiation to avoid misunderstandings that could result in serious injury or death. Male snow leopards are larger and stronger than females, but females defending territory or potential offspring are more dangerous than most males are prepared to handle. Her behavioral patterns shift as reproductive hormones influence decision-making processes that normally prioritize individual survival above all other considerations. Risk tolerance increases, territorial boundaries become more flexible, and social interaction patterns change to accommodate behaviors that would be unthinkable during non-breeding periods. The courtship calls continue throughout the morning, a complex dialogue that's negotiating everything from meeting locations to timing of physical encounters to post-mating territorial arrangements. Snow leopard reproduction requires coordination that balances genetic imperatives with survival necessities in environments where cooperation costs energy and mistakes cost lives. Weather conditions affect courtship timing and location decisions. Storm systems approaching from the north could disrupt planned encounters, while temperature fluctuations might influence the viability of reproductive timing. The conversation happening through vocalizations includes meteorological considerations that urban animals never need to factor into breeding decisions. Her final call of the morning carries acceptance signals that indicate willingness to proceed with direct physical encounter, but under terms that maintain her territorial authority and escape options if the meeting doesn't proceed according to reproductive protocols. The response comes immediately, indicating the male has been waiting for this particular signal to begin his final approach. Time to discover whether this potential mate meets the biological and behavioral criteria that justify the risks and energy expenditure that snow leopard reproduction requires in the world's most challenging environments. Temporary partner shared hunt. The meeting happens at dawn on neutral ground, a wind-swept plateau that belongs to neither territory, but has been used for territorial negotiations and breeding encounters for generations of snow leopards. The approach is cautious on both sides, weapon systems capable of lethal damage held in check by reproductive chemistry that temporarily overrides normal predatory responses. He's larger than she expected, probably 52 kilograms of male snow leopard in prime condition, with the broad shoulders and thick neck that indicate successful territorial establishment and hunting career. His scars tell stories of survival that match her own accumulated experience, while his movement patterns suggest athletic ability that has been tested under mountain conditions. The initial interaction involves careful behavioral protocols that prevent misunderstandings between animals capable of killing each other within seconds. Approach angles avoid triggering defensive responses, vocalizations continue, reassurance signaling, and body language maintains non-threatening postures while advertising genetic fitness and territorial capability. Scent exchange becomes biological background checking, as both animals analyze chemical signatures that provide detailed information about health, hunting success, territorial status, and genetic compatibility. This is mate evaluation that operates through sophisticated biochemistry, providing data that influences reproductive decisions through processes that happen below conscious awareness. The courtship period is brief. Snow leopards can't afford extended reproductive rituals in environments where every calorie counts and every day brings new survival challenges. But within that brief period, they accomplish genetic evaluation, territorial negotiation, and behavioral coordination that will determine whether cooperation produces successful offspring. Then something unexpected happens. A barrel herd emerges from the valley below, moving along migration routes that bring them within hunting range of the plateau where courtship negotiations are occurring. Both snow leopards immediately shift attention from reproduction to opportunity assessment, reproductive chemistry temporarily suspended by predatory focus. What follows represents cooperation that occurs rarely in snow leopard social behavior. Instead of competing for hunting opportunity or establishing priority through dominance displays, they begin coordinating approach strategies that utilize both animals' capabilities to optimize hunting success against prey that would normally escape single predator approaches. The herd consists of 8 adults and 3 juveniles, moving in defensive formation that assigns sentinel duties to outer animals, while inner group members focus on feeding. Standard snow leopard hunting tactics involve single-animal ambush approaches that succeed against isolated prey, but fail against organized group defensive behaviors. Their coordinated approach begins with positioning that allows simultaneous attacks from different directions, forcing prey animals to choose between escape routes that lead toward one predator or another. This isn't conscious tactical planning, it's instinctive cooperation that activates when breeding chemistry temporarily overrides normal competitive responses. She takes position on high ground that provides visual oversight of the entire hunting area while blocking escape routes toward the eastern ridges. He moves into position that allows approach from the north while cutting off access to traditional shelter areas. The coordination happens through minimal vocal signaling that avoids alerting prey animals to predator presence. The attack unfolds with precision that would impress military strategists. As she begins her approach from above, drawing defensive attention and panic responses that reduce group cohesion, he launches his own attack from concealment that targets prey animals driven into panic by her visible approach. The Baral herd's defensive coordination collapses under pressure from threats arriving from multiple directions simultaneously. Animals that would normally maintain group discipline during single predator approaches scatter in individual survival attempts that make them vulnerable to predators positioned to intercept multiple escape routes. His attack succeeds against a young adult Baral driven toward his position by panic responses triggered by her approach. Her own strike targets a different animal whose escape route leads directly through her ambush zone. Within seconds, coordinated hunting has produced results that neither animal could have achieved through individual effort. The aftermath of successful cooperative hunting presents territorial challenges that don't exist during individual predation. 2 large carcasses on neutral ground, 2 predators whose normal relationship involves territorial avoidance, and feeding opportunities that require negotiation of sharing arrangements between animals whose typical behavior patterns involve resource competition. The solution emerges through behaviors that exist only during breeding season cooperation. Feeding occurs simultaneously but at different carcasses, reducing competition while allowing both animals to benefit from coordinated hunting success. Territory marking around kill sites establishes temporary shared use agreements that will expire with breeding season chemistry. Post-hunt behavior includes mutual grooming that removes scent signatures that might attract scavengers or competitors to feeding sites. This isn't affection. It's operational security that protects valuable resources through cooperation between animals whose survival normally requires avoiding exactly this kind of close contact. The cooperative hunting demonstrates capabilities that single snow leopards rarely display, suggesting that social cooperation might provide survival advantages that offset the energy costs and territorial complications that normally make snow leopard social interaction prohibitively expensive. As feeding concludes, and territorial chemistry begins reasserting normal behavioral patterns, both animals begin the gradual transition back to individual operation. But the memory of cooperative success will influence future behavioral decisions, and the territory boundary negotiations that follow breeding season will reflect the tactical advantages that cooperation demonstrated. Time to resume individual survival strategies, but with enhanced understanding of alternative approaches that breeding season occasionally makes possible. Hush Den Kitten Care Snapshot. 2 months later, in a granite alcove hidden deep in a maze of rock formations that require technical climbing skills to access, 2 small shadows demonstrate that cooperative hunting produced results that extend far beyond successful feeding. The den site she's prepared represents location selection that balances accessibility for maternal care with security against threats that range from weather to predators to accidental discovery. The alcove extends 3 meters into solid granite, providing shelter from wind, rain, and snow, while maintaining enough opening size for escape routes if larger predators or human activity threatens den security. The entrance is concealed by natural rock formations that make visual detection nearly impossible, while scent trails leading to the den follow paths that discourage casual investigation. Her 2 cubs represent genetic investment that will require massive energy expenditure over the next 18 months, as she teaches them everything they need to know about survival in conditions that kill most mountain animals within their first winter. At 8 weeks old, they're beginning to show the personality traits and physical characteristics that will determine their survival prospects. The larger cub, a male, displays aggressive curiosity and athletic ability that suggest good survival potential, but also tendency toward risk-taking that could prove fatal during learning phases. His sister shows more cautious behavioral patterns combined with superior observational skills that indicate different but equally valuable survival strategies. Feeding the cubs requires hunting success rates that push her capabilities to maximum efficiency. Lactation demands caloric input that equals the energy requirements of continuous athletic performance, while maintaining milk production rich enough in fats and proteins to support rapid development in cubs that must reach hunting competence before their first winter. The cubs' play behavior serves multiple educational functions disguised as entertainment. Wrestling matches teach combat techniques they'll need for territorial disputes and hunting. Stalking games develop the stealth capabilities required for successful predation. Climbing competitions build athletic skills essential for mountain navigation and escape from threats. Their development follows patterns refined across millions of years of evolution in high-altitude environments. Eye color shifts from newborn blue toward the amber of adult hunting vision. Pupil dilation capacity increases to prepare for night hunting requirements. Hearing sensitivity develops to detect prey movement and predator approaches across mountain distances. Dental development proceeds on schedules that synchronize with hunting training requirements. Milk teeth are replaced by adult carnassials designed for shearing meat and cracking bones. Jaw muscle development provides crushing force needed for killing prey animals that might outweigh adult snow leopards. The den becomes classroom where she demonstrates hunting techniques through play that gradually increases in complexity and realism. Mock ambush exercises teach patience, positioning, and timing. Prey capture games develop jaw strength and killing bite precision. Territorial boundary lessons establish understanding of scent marking and communication protocols. Weather protection requires constant maternal attention, as mountain conditions test developing physiological systems that haven't yet achieved adult efficiency. Temperature regulation, oxygen processing, and altitude adaptation all develop gradually, while cubs remain vulnerable to environmental conditions that adults handle routinely. Her hunting schedule adapts to maternal responsibilities that require balancing individual caloric needs with lactation demands and den security requirements. Hunt duration increases to improve success rates, but range decreases to maintain proximity to cubs who can't yet survive extended maternal absence. Scent management around the den becomes critical operational security. Her own chemical signatures could attract predators or competitors who might view cubs as territorial threats or feeding opportunities. Approaches to the den follow paths that minimize scent trails, while maintaining surveillance capabilities that detect approaching threats. The cub's vocalizations require training that balances communication needs with security requirements. Contact calls for maintaining maternal connection must be distinct from territorial vocalizations that might advertise den locations to competitors. Volume control becomes essential skill in environments where sound travels for kilometers. Educational feeding begins as she introduces small prey items that teach hunting skills while providing nutritional supplements to milk diet. Live prey allows practice of killing techniques, while pre-killed animals provide safe opportunities to learn prey anatomy and feeding strategies. Territorial knowledge transfer happens through exploration sessions that gradually expand the cub's understanding of their mountain environment. Route memorization, landmark recognition, and hazard identification all require direct experience under maternal supervision that prevents fatal learning errors. The cub's survival prospects improve daily as developmental milestones get achieved and environmental knowledge accumulates. But statistical reality indicates that mountain environments will claim at least one of them before independence, making every teaching session potentially crucial for species continuation. Time management becomes critical as maternal responsibilities compete with individual survival requirements that can't be postponed indefinitely. The cubs must learn faster than normal educational timelines allow, because winter won't wait for their developmental schedule to reach ideal completion. Fading starlight, remnant prey bones. Autumn arrives in the high places not with falling leaves or migrating birds, but with the systematic cleanup operations that prepare mountain ecosystems for winter's scarcity. The scattered remains of her successful hunts throughout the season tell stories of predation and scavenging that demonstrate the complex food webs operating in environments where nothing organic goes to waste. The barrel skull from her spring hunt sits bleached white against granite, horn sheaths removed by rodents who need calcium for their own survival preparations. The bone surface shows tooth marks from multiple scavenger species, pika gnawing for mineral content, marmots extracting marrow residues, and the distinctive beak marks of Lemurgia vultures who specialize in bone processing. Lammergeiers represent the aerial cleanup crew of mountain ecosystems, birds capable of digesting entire skeletons by dropping bones from great heights onto granite surfaces that shatter them into digestible fragments. Their stomach acid can dissolve bone material that would kill most other scavengers, making them essential components of high-altitude nutrient recycling systems. The scavenging hierarchy operates with precision that would impress waste management engineers. Primary scavengers like ravens and red foxes arrive first, removing soft tissues and organ meats while leaving structural components for secondary processing. Insects and arthropods handle decomposition at microscopic levels that return organic compounds to soil systems. Her own feeding behavior has evolved to accommodate scavenger community needs while protecting her interests as primary predator. Carcass positioning influences which scavengers gain access, while feeding schedules determine how much remains available for community cleanup operations. This isn't altruism, it's ecosystem management that maintains balanced predator-scavenger relationships. The bone scatter patterns reveal feeding behaviors that occurred months ago. Parallel tooth marks indicate fox activity, while puncture holes show raven beak penetration. Rounded edges on smaller bones indicate extended rodent gnawing, and the complete absence of certain skeletal elements suggests Lemurgia bone-dropping activities. Seasonal scavenging behaviors change as different species prepare for winter in ways that affect nutrient cycling throughout mountain ecosystems. Marmots increase bone consumption to build calcium reserves for hibernation. Pikas intensify mineral extraction to support burrow construction and winter food storage operations. The largest bones from her kills serve multiple functions beyond nutrition for scavenger communities. Femurs and tibias become gnawing posts that help maintain dental health in species whose survival depends on keeping teeth sharp for winter survival. Skull fragments provide calcium supplements that support antler growth in deer species and horn development in sheep populations. Decomposition rates at altitude follow patterns that differ dramatically from lowland environments. Cold temperatures and low oxygen levels slow bacterial activity that normally breaks down organic matter within weeks. Instead, decomposition can take months or even years. creating long-term feeding opportunities for scavenger communities that rely on extended resource availability. Weather affects bone preservation in ways that create seasonal feeding opportunities for different scavenger species. Freeze-thaw cycles crack bone surfaces, exposing marrow contents to animals that couldn't otherwise access internal nutrients. Wind erosion gradually reduces bone mass to calcium-rich powder that gets incorporated into soil systems supporting high-altitude plant communities. The molecular recycling happening around these bone scatters represents nutrient transfer systems that connect predator success with plant growth, herbivore nutrition, and overall ecosystem productivity. Calcium from barrel bones eventually supports grass growth that feeds future barrel generations, creating cycles that operate across multiple years and species generations. Microorganism communities in bone-enriched soil develop capabilities for processing organic compounds in environments where biological activity operates at efficiency levels necessary for extreme altitude survival. These bacterial and fungal populations represent the foundation level of food webs that support every larger organism in mountain ecosystems. Her cubs, now 4 months old and beginning independent exploration of their territory, investigate these bone scatters as educational opportunities that teach species identification, prey anatomy, and feeding strategy analysis. Each skeleton represents a textbook in applied hunting that demonstrates techniques they'll need to master for their own survival. The bone arrangements also serve as territorial markers that advertise hunting success to other predators who might challenge territorial boundaries. Fresh kills indicate active, successful territory holders, while old bone scatters suggest established predator presence with long-term territorial control. This is biological resume posting that influences competitive dynamics across multiple snow leopard territories. Scavenger activity around her kill sites provides intelligence about ecosystem health and prey population dynamics. Heavy scavenger traffic indicates healthy prey populations that support robust secondary consumer communities. Reduced scavenging activity might signal declining prey numbers or increased competition from other predator species. The cubs' investigation of bone scatters includes lessons about scent interpretation that teach them to read chemical signatures left by various scavenger species. Learning to identify fox scent, raven markings, and lammergeier activity patterns provides intelligence-gathering skills they'll use throughout their lives to monitor ecosystem conditions. Chemical analysis of bone surfaces reveals feeding chronologies that demonstrate the temporal patterns of scavenging community activity. Early scavenger species leave different chemical signatures than late-stage processors, creating layered information systems that experienced predators can read like historical records. The transition from fresh kills to cleaned skeletons represents time-lapse photography of mountain ecosystem function, demonstrating nutrient flow patterns that connect apex predators with primary producers through complex webs of intermediate consumers. Every bone fragment tells part of the story about how life sustains itself in conditions that challenge basic biological processes. As winter approaches, even these bone remnants will be covered by snow that temporarily removes them from active ecosystem participation, but spring snowmelt will reveal them again, continuing decomposition processes that operate across seasonal cycles and contribute to long-term nutrient availability in environments where every organic molecule represents precious resources. The cubs move on from their bone scatter investigation, carrying new knowledge about ecosystem function and their role as future contributors to nutrient cycling systems that have sustained mountain life for millions of years. Human shadows, herder encroachment. The sound reaches her before the visual confirmation. Bells with the distinctive bronze tonality that announces yak herds moving through mountain corridors that have connected human communities across the Himalayas for thousands of years. But these aren't distant bells from traditional trade routes. They're close enough to indicate herder encroachment into territories that have remained human-free for generations. Smoke plumes rising from the valley below confirm her acoustic intelligence. Cooking fires, probably butter tea preparation and sampa roasting, creating chemical signatures that advertise human presence across distances that carry information to every predator within kilometers. The scent of burning yak dung, traditional fuel in regions above the tree line, adds complexity to atmospheric chemistry that normally carries only natural geological and biological signatures. The herder camp represents collision between human pastoral traditions and snow leopard territorial requirements in landscapes where coexistence demands careful negotiation of resource access and risk management. Her territory now overlaps with human economic activity that brings potential conflict over livestock predation, territorial boundaries, and hunting ground access. Through binoculars, she doesn't possess but enhanced vision that serves similar functions. She observes the human activity patterns that will determine whether this encroachment represents temporary passage or permanent territorial modification. Tent arrangements, livestock distribution, and herder movement patterns provide intelligence about intentions and duration that influence her tactical response options. The yak herd represents temptation balanced against catastrophic risk. Individual yaks outweigh her by 6-to-1 ratios, but young animals or individuals separated from herd protection might provide hunting opportunities that deliver more calories than weeks of baral hunting. However, livestock predation triggers human retaliation that historically has eliminated entire snow leopard populations. Her cubs complicate risk assessment calculations that previously involved only individual survival considerations. Maternal responsibilities require evaluating threats to offspring that can't yet escape human pursuit or survive extended territorial displacement. The herder presence creates educational challenges about human avoidance that aren't covered in normal snow leopard survival curricula. Domestic dogs accompanying the herder camp present immediate tactical challenges that wild prey animals don't create. Dogs possess scent detection capabilities that can locate snow leopard dens, tracking persistence that can pursue prey across terrain advantages that normally favor predators, and pack coordination that can overwhelm individual snow leopards through cooperative hunting techniques. Human activity changes acoustic environments in ways that disrupt normal hunting strategies and territorial communication systems. Conversation, radio broadcasts, and mechanical sounds mask natural audio signatures that snow leopards use for navigation, threat detection, and prey location. The sonic pollution creates functional habitat degradation that affects predator effectiveness. Livestock grazing patterns modify vegetation communities that support prey species populations through changes in plant availability, soil composition, and water access. Overgrazing can eliminate natural prey habitat while creating competition between domestic and wild herbivores for limited high-altitude forage resources. Traditional herder knowledge includes snow leopard awareness that results in behavioral modifications designed to minimize predator-livestock conflict. Herding dogs, protective corralling, and nighttime livestock security measures represent human adaptations to predator presence that acknowledge coexistence requirements while protecting economic investments. The economic mathematics of human-predator conflict operate on scales that dwarf individual snow leopard survival calculations. Single livestock losses can represent family income equivalent to months of herder wages, creating economic pressure for predator elimination that overrides conservation concerns or traditional tolerance patterns. Her territorial knowledge must expand to include human behavioral patterns that influence hunting opportunities, den security, and territorial accessibility. Learning to read human activity schedules becomes essential survival skill in landscapes where human presence creates both opportunities and existential threats. Government conservation programs attempt to balance herder economic needs with predator conservation through compensation systems, alternative livelihood development, and education programs that promote coexistence strategies. But program effectiveness depends on implementation quality that varies dramatically across different administrative regions. The cubs' education requires lessons about human avoidance that their genetic programming didn't anticipate. Learning to recognize human scent signatures, avoid areas with human activity, and respond appropriately to human presence becomes critical curriculum that determines survival prospects in landscapes where human encroachment continues expanding. Conflict resolution strategies exist within traditional herder cultures that include predator tolerance, protective rather than retaliatory responses to livestock losses, and recognition of snow leopards as natural ecosystem components. But these traditions compete with economic pressures and changing cultural values that may favor elimination over coexistence. Her immediate tactical response involves increased vigilance, modified hunting schedules that avoid human activity periods, and dense security assessment that considers human detection capabilities. The territorial equation has become more complex, requiring solutions that balance traditional survival strategies with adaptive responses to unprecedented threats. The bells fade as the herder camp moves on toward destinations beyond her territorial boundaries, but the encounter leaves permanent changes in risk assessment matrices that will influence decision-making for the remainder of her life. Lens flash, conservationist's camera trap. The infrared flash triggers with silent efficiency as she passes the cunningly concealed camera trap positioned at a natural choke point where animal traffic concentrates between granite formations. For a fraction of a second, invisible light illuminates her passage, while digital sensors capture images that will travel from this remote mountain location to conservation databases on distant continents. Her reaction to the flash is immediate but controlled, a pause in movement, ears rotating to identify the source, pupils contracting in response to sudden illumination. Her nose analyzes the scent signature of plastic housing, battery acid, and the distinctive chemical smell of electronic equipment that doesn't belong in natural environments. The camera trap represents the intersection between traditional snow leopard behavior and modern conservation science, a monitoring system designed to gather population data without direct human intrusion that might disrupt normal territorial and hunting patterns. But the devices create their own forms of environmental modification that affect animal behavior in subtle ways. Technology concealment attempts to minimize behavioral disruption, but animals adapted to detecting threats through sensory systems refined across millions of years notice anomalies that human engineers might consider insignificant. The plastic housing creates visual discontinuities that don't match natural granite textures. Electronic components emit electromagnetic signatures detectable by nervous systems evolved to process environmental information at molecular levels. Conservation research requires population estimates, territorial mapping, and individual identification that traditional observation methods can't achieve in terrain where human presence would fundamentally alter animal behavior patterns. Camera traps provide data collection capabilities that operate continuously across seasonal cycles while maintaining minimal direct human impact. Her image will be processed through facial recognition software that can identify individual snow leopards through rosette patterns, scars, and other distinguishing characteristics visible in digital photographs. This creates biological databases that track territorial movements, hunting success, reproduction rates, and survival statistics across entire mountain ecosystems. The infrared illumination system operates on wavelengths that most mammals can't detect, but snow leopard visual systems evolved for extreme low-light conditions include sensitivity ranges that extend beyond typical mammalian capabilities. She may be aware of illumination that conservation researchers assume remains invisible to their study subjects. Motion sensor triggering systems detect animal movement through passive infrared technology that responds to temperature differentials between animal bodies and background environments. At high altitude where ambient temperatures approach animal body temperature, sensor sensitivity requires calibration that sometimes produces false triggers from wind-blown vegetation or geological thermal variation. Data transmission from remote camera locations uses satellite communication systems that upload images and location data to research centers where conservation biologists analyze population trends, territorial usage patterns, and behavioral changes that might indicate ecosystem health modifications or external pressure impacts. Her cub's presence in some images provides reproduction rate data that conservation programs use to estimate population viability and predict future snow leopard numbers under various environmental scenarios. Individual reproductive success becomes statistical input for species survival models that operate at landscape and regional scales. Battery life in extreme cold conditions limits camera trap operational duration and reliability. Temperature effects on electronic components can produce equipment failures that create data gaps in long-term monitoring programs. Solar charging systems help extend operational capacity, but require weather conditions that don't always cooperate with power generation needs. Human scent contamination from camera installation and maintenance can affect animal behavior around monitoring sites for extended periods after human presence. Some animals avoid camera trap locations, while others may investigate equipment out of curiosity, creating behavioral modifications that bias data collection toward specific personality types or experience levels. GPS coordinates associated with each camera trap image provide precise location data that enables mapping of individual territory ranges, movement corridors, and habitat usage patterns. This information supports conservation planning that identifies critical habitat areas requiring protection from human development or resource extraction activities. The conservation value of camera trap data extends beyond immediate research applications to support international conservation agreements, funding allocation decisions, and policy development that affects snow leopard populations across their entire range. Individual images become components of species survival strategies that operate at geopolitical scales. Her passage triggers not just photographic documentation but participation in conservation science that may ultimately determine whether snow leopards continue to exist in landscapes that have supported them for millions of years. The lens flash represents a moment where individual survival intersects with species continuation across evolutionary timescales. The camera resets itself for the next triggering event, returning to silent surveillance while she continues her territorial patrol, now documented as another data point in humanity's attempt to understand and preserve one of the planet's most elusive apex predators. Near cutting-edge snare encounter, the scent hits her nostrils 50 meters before visual detection becomes possible: iron oxide, rust, and the distinctive chemical signature of galvanized steel wire that doesn't belong in any natural mountain environment. Mixed with these metallic scents are darker chemical notes: dried blood, fear pheromones, and the unmistakable smell of death that triggers every survival instinct evolution installed in apex predators. Her approach to the scent source becomes methodical, cautious, informed by ancestral memories of artificial dangers that can kill without warning. Each step receives full sensory analysis before commitment. Each decision point gets evaluated for potential trap mechanisms that might target investigating animals. The snare reveals itself as a work of lethal craftsmanship: aircraft cable formed into slip noose configuration, anchored to granite outcrop with metal hardware that could restrain animals many times her size. The loop diameter suggests targeting of large prey species, but snare mechanics operate without species discrimination. Anything investigating the blood scent becomes potential victim. Dried blood on the cable and disturbed ground around the anchor point tell stories of previous capture that ended in death through strangulation, exhaustion, or predator attack on helpless prey. The victim was probably Barrel or Ibex, judging by hoofprint patterns in soil and hair samples caught on wire barbs designed to tighten with struggle attempts. Illegal wildlife trade drives snare placement in mountain territories where enforcement presence remains minimal and detection probability stays low. Snow leopard pelts, bones, and organs command prices that make poaching economically attractive despite legal prohibitions and international conservation agreements. The snare represents intersection between local economic desperation and international criminal networks that traffic in endangered species products. Remote mountain communities facing economic hardship may participate in poaching activities that threaten species survival, while providing immediate income sources that legitimate employment alternatives can't match. Her investigation maintains safe distance from trigger mechanisms that could activate snare closure around investigating animals. Wire snares operate through mechanical advantage systems that can tighten with force sufficient to cut through fur, skin, and muscle before prey animals can escape. Death comes through strangulation, blood loss, or exhaustion during extended struggle periods. Anti-poaching patrol efforts face logistical challenges in terrain that requires technical mountaineering skills to access and covers areas too vast for comprehensive surveillance. Detection and removal of snare networks depends on intelligence gathering, community cooperation, and enforcement resources that often prove inadequate for protection requirements. The blood scent continues attracting scavenger species that might trigger additional snare activations, creating kill zones where single snare placements eliminate multiple animals through secondary capture of species, investigating initial victims. Scavenger deaths multiply ecosystem impacts beyond target species losses. Education programs attempt to reduce poaching pressure through alternative livelihood development, conservation awareness building, and economic compensation for wildlife protection activities. But program effectiveness requires sustained funding, community participation, and enforcement capability that political and economic conditions don't always support. Her cubs' education must include lessons about artificial dangers that genetic programming didn't anticipate, learning to recognize human-made threats, avoid investigation of suspicious objects, and respond appropriately to non-natural environmental modifications becomes essential curriculum for survival in landscapes where human activity creates lethal hazards. International conservation efforts focus on reducing demand for wildlife products through consumer education, legal enforcement, and trade monitoring systems. But market demand continues driving poaching pressure that affects snow leopard populations throughout their range, making individual survival dependent on geopolitical conservation success. The wire configuration and anchor system suggest professional poaching equipment rather than subsistence hunting gear, indicating organized criminal activity that operates across multiple territories and targets various species for international wildlife trade networks. This represents threats that extend beyond individual territorial concerns to species-level survival challenges. Legal frameworks exist for wildlife protection, but enforcement in remote mountain territories requires international cooperation, adequate funding, and political commitment that varies dramatically across different jurisdictions. Conservation success depends on legal systems that many mountain communities have limited access to or confidence in. Her response to snare detection involves immediate area avoidance and route modification that will affect territorial patrol patterns for extended periods. The presence of one snare suggests additional placement throughout the territory, requiring comprehensive threat assessment and behavioral adaptation that reduces territorial accessibility. She memorizes the location for future avoidance, while continuing territorial patrol through alternative routes that minimize exposure to potential snare placements. Survival in landscapes contaminated by poaching pressure requires constant vigilance and behavioral modifications that affect normal hunting and territorial maintenance activities. The snare remains in place, waiting for the next animal attracted by scent signatures that promise feeding opportunities but deliver death through human engineering designed to profit from wildlife elimination. Altitude dreams, recovery, and reflection. Deep in the granite shelter that has become her sanctuary, she settles into the profound rest that high-altitude predators require for biological systems operating at the edge of physiological possibility. Her breathing slows to match the thin air that provides just enough oxygen for maintenance of vital functions while conserving energy for the next hunting cycle. Sleep at 4,000 meters involves metabolic adjustments that would fascinate medical researchers studying human adaptation to extreme environments. Her heart rate drops to levels that might indicate medical emergency in lowland mammals, but represents optimal efficiency for organisms evolved to extract maximum benefit from limited oxygen availability. Dream states in snow leopards remain largely mysterious to scientists, but her muscle twitches and eye movements during REM sleep suggest neural activity that might represent hunting sequence rehearsal, territorial mapping, or memory consolidation of survival experiences. The brain activity patterns indicate complex information processing that continues during rest periods. Her subconscious mind processes the day's experiences in ways that strengthen neural pathways associated with successful survival strategies while weakening connections associated with ineffective behaviors. This is biological education that happens during sleep, refining hunting techniques and territorial awareness through neurological repetition and reinforcement. Memory systems specialized for spatial navigation continue operating during rest periods, consolidating information about territorial features, prey movement patterns, and hazard locations. Her mental map of the territory undergoes continuous updating that improves accuracy and detail through integration of recent experiences with historical knowledge. Muscle repair processes activate during deep sleep phases, rebuilding tissue damaged by the extreme physical demands of high-altitude hunting and territorial maintenance. Protein synthesis increases, cellular regeneration accelerates, and metabolic waste products get cleared from muscle tissue that operates at performance levels approaching biological limits. Immune system function receives priority during rest periods, as resources get redirected toward pathogen resistance and cellular maintenance that keeps predators healthy in environments where injury or illness can prove rapidly fatal. Sleep becomes critical medical treatment that maintains peak physical condition. Temperature regulation during rest requires precise control of blood circulation that maintains core warmth while minimizing energy expenditure. Her fur arrangement optimizes insulation, while her positioning maximizes heat retention, using body configuration that reduces surface area exposed to cold air. Digestive processes continue working to extract maximum nutritional value from her most recent kill, breaking down proteins and fats into compounds that can be stored as energy reserves or used for cellular maintenance and repair. High-altitude metabolism operates with efficiency that matches the limited caloric intake available from successful hunting. Her dreams might include sensory replay of hunting sequences, with neural activity that rehearses muscle movements, timing calculations, and trajectory planning. This is biological virtual reality that allows practice of survival skills without the energy expenditure and injury risk associated with actual hunting attempts. Stress hormone levels decrease during rest periods, as her endocrine system recovers from the constant alertness required for survival in environments where relaxation can mean death. But even in deep sleep, her nervous system maintains minimal awareness of acoustic and chemical signals that might indicate immediate threats. The cubs sleep nearby, their own dream states likely involving play behavior rehearsal and learning consolidation that prepares them for independence in one of Earth's most challenging predator environments. Their rapid growth requires sleep patterns that support cellular development and neural pathway formation. Memory integration during sleep helps connect current experiences with ancestral knowledge encoded in instinctive behavioral patterns. Individual learning gets combined with species-level survival strategies through neural processes that operate below conscious awareness but influence future decision-making. Circadian rhythm regulation at extreme altitude faces challenges from environmental factors that don't exist at lower elevations. Solar radiation intensity, atmospheric pressure variations, and temperature fluctuations all affect biological clock mechanisms that coordinate rest and activity periods. Her sleep position provides immediate escape capability if threats emerge, demonstrating that even unconscious behavior patterns maintain survival priorities. Muscle tension never completely disappears, maintaining readiness for instant activation if circumstances require immediate emergency response. REM sleep phases might include processing of social interactions, territorial negotiations, and breeding behaviors that require complex decision-making under conditions where errors can prove fatal. Social behavior rehearsal during dreams could improve real-world performance in high-stakes encounters with other snow leopards. Recovery from high-altitude hunting requires sleep patterns that address physiological stress from oxygen limitation, temperature extremes, and physical demands that push biological systems to operational limits. Rest becomes biological necessity rather than luxury in environments where peak performance determines survival. Time passes in the mountain silence as her recovery continues, preparing her for another day of survival challenges that test every adaptation evolution has refined across millions of years of high-altitude predator development. Migratory move descent to winter pastures. Temperature plummets as the first major storm system of winter approaches from the north, bringing weather conditions that will transform her high-altitude territory from challenging hunting ground into frozen wasteland, where survival becomes impossible for the next 4 months. Migration isn't choice. It's biological imperative encoded in survival strategies that have kept snow leopards alive through countless winter cycles. The ibex herds began their descent 3 days ago, following migration corridors worn into mountainsides by thousands of years of seasonal movement between summer feeding areas and winter shelter zones. Their departure signals ecosystem-wide recognition that the easy living of summer has ended and the serious business of winter survival is about to begin. Her cubs, now 6 months old and approaching minimal independence, must learn migration routes and winter survival techniques that will determine whether they survive their first high-altitude winter. The educational challenges of migration exceed anything they've encountered during summer territorial training, requiring knowledge that can't be taught through play, but must be learned through direct exposure to conditions that kill inexperienced animals. Route planning involves three-dimensional navigation through terrain that winter weather will modify beyond recognition. Paths that remain passable in autumn become avalanche zones, wind traps, or impassable ice fields that can trap animals in locations where escape becomes impossible. Migration routes require alternative planning that accounts for weather variables no animal can predict with certainty. The descent begins at dawn, as atmospheric pressure changes indicate approaching storm systems that could strand them at elevations where winter survival becomes impossible. Her navigation follows ridgeline routes that provide wind protection while maintaining visual contact with landmarks that remain recognizable across seasonal changes. Weather prediction through natural indicators becomes critical survival skill as they move through elevation zones where conditions change rapidly with altitude. Cloud formations, wind patterns, and atmospheric pressure sensations all provide meteorological intelligence that influences timing decisions and route selection strategies. Her cubs learn through direct experience how altitude affects breathing, temperature regulation, and energy expenditure calculations. Each 100 meters of descent requires physiological adjustments that prepare them for environmental conditions they've never experienced, but must master for winter survival. Traditional migration corridors follow geological features that provide natural highways between elevation zones, river valleys carved by glacial action, ridge systems that connect mountain ranges, and pass routes that minimize exposure to avalanche zones and extreme weather conditions. These routes have been tested through geological timescales that exceed species survival periods. Prey-animal migration patterns influence predator route selection, as hunting opportunities decrease with altitude and prey concentration in winter habitats provides feeding possibilities that might not exist in dispersed summer distributions. Following prey movements ensures access to food sources during periods when hunting success rates approach critical minimums. Snow conditions affect travel efficiency in ways that determine daily progress rates and energy expenditure calculations. Fresh powder provides good traction but requires more energy for movement. Ice creates slip hazards but easier passage. Wet snow presents the worst combination of difficult travel with hypothermia risk from moisture penetration. The cubs' education includes lessons about reading snow conditions, selecting appropriate travel surfaces, and managing energy expenditure during extended movement periods. These skills require practice under maternal supervision that prevents learning errors that could prove fatal during independent travel. Cache locations throughout the migration route provide food storage opportunities that might support survival during extended travel periods or emergency situations where weather conditions prevent continued movement. But cache security faces challenges from scavenger communities and weather effects that can eliminate stored food supplies. Territorial boundaries become fluid during migration periods as multiple snow leopard families move through areas that normally support single territorial animals. Social interaction protocols must accommodate temporary territory sharing while maintaining individual family group integrity and resource access. Human activity along traditional migration routes creates obstacles that historical snow leopard movement patterns didn't anticipate. Roads, settlements, and resource extraction activities force route modifications that may increase travel distances, energy expenditure, and exposure to hazards that traditional routes avoided. The cubs must learn to recognize and respond appropriately to human presence during migration, when movement requirements might force passage through areas where human avoidance strategies that work in summer territories become impossible to maintain. Human encounter protocols become essential survival curriculum. Navigation by celestial reference points provides backup guidance systems when weather conditions obscure visual landmarks that normally support route finding. star positions and moon phases offer directional information that remains constant across seasonal changes and atmospheric conditions. Her maternal responsibilities include route selection that balances optimal travel conditions with educational opportunities that prepare the cubs for independent migration in future years. Every decision involves trade-offs between immediate safety and long-term survival skill development. As they complete the first day of migration, temporary shelter selection demonstrates winter survival techniques that emphasize wind protection, insulation optimization, and energy conservation. Each rest stop becomes classroom for winter survival education that determines whether the cubs survive to see another spring. The migration continues toward winter territories that offer survival possibilities in conditions that defeat most mountain life, following routes that connect seasonal habitats across elevational gradients that span the operating limits of high-altitude ecosystems. First light again, cycle continues. 6 months later, as spring light returns to peaks that have spent winter in shadow and ice, she emerges from lower elevation territories where survival depended on skills accumulated through years of mountain experience. The cubs survived their first winter, transformed from playful kittens into lean adolescents whose capabilities approach minimal independence requirements. The ascent back to summer territories reverses migration patterns that carried them through winter survival challenges, but spring migration presents different obstacles and opportunities than autumn descent routes. Snowpack conditions, avalanche hazards, and emerging vegetation create travel conditions that require adaptive route selection and timing strategies. Her territory, reclaimed after winter absence, shows evidence of other occupants who used her absence for territorial expansion attempts. Scent markings from neighboring snow leopards indicate boundary testing that will require diplomatic resolution or potential conflict to re-establish previous territorial arrangements. The cubs demonstrate independence capabilities that suggest approaching readiness for territorial establishment in areas beyond her current boundaries. Their hunting skills, while not yet fully developed, show competence that could support survival if supplemented by occasional maternal assistance during difficult periods. Prey animal populations reflect winter survival statistics that influence predator carrying capacity and territorial distribution patterns. Some species show population reductions from winter mortality, while others successfully navigated seasonal challenges and present improved hunting opportunities for returning predators. Weather patterns indicate seasonal changes that affect hunting strategies, territorial maintenance requirements, and reproductive timing for the approaching breeding season. Her own reproductive conditions suggests readiness for another breeding cycle that could produce additional cubs requiring territorial expansion or partition. The landscape bears winter's marks in geological modifications that create new hunting opportunities and travel challenges. Avalanche scars provide fresh habitat for pioneer vegetation that attracts herbivore species, while ice damage opens new sightlines that improve ambush positioning in previously marginal hunting areas. Her cubs begin displaying behavioral independence that indicates approaching territorial dispersal requirements. Adolescent snow leopards must establish individual territories before reaching full adult size and capability, requiring parental tolerance balanced against territorial resource limitations. Cache sites throughout her territory require inspection and restocking as hunting success replenishes food storage reserves depleted during winter survival periods. Resource management becomes critical for supporting both individual survival and continued maternal responsibilities. Territorial communication networks resume operation as returning snow leopards, re-establish scent marking patterns, and vocal communication systems that coordinate individual territories with landscape-scale population distribution. The social fabric of isolated predators reconnects across mountain ecosystems. Human activity patterns have also resumed, following winter dormancy, bringing renewed intersection opportunities and potential conflicts that require adaptive management strategies developed through previous experience with human snow leopard interaction challenges. Her reflection on survival cycles that brought her from inexperienced juvenile to successful territorial female with surviving offspring represents individual achievement within evolutionary processes that have sustained snow leopard populations through climatic changes spanning geological timescales. The mountain ecosystem prepares for another annual cycle of growth, reproduction, survival, and renewal that connects individual animal experiences with species continuation and ecosystem function. Each successful survival story contributes to population viability and genetic diversity that determines long-term species persistence. The cubs will soon begin independent territory establishment that starts new survival stories in adjacent mountain areas, carrying forward genetic and cultural knowledge that represents their contribution to snow leopard adaptation and evolution. Individual success becomes species success through reproductive contribution to future generations. Morning light illuminates granite peaks that have witnessed countless cycles of predator, survival, territorial establishment, reproduction, and generational succession. The mountains remain constant while the life they support continues evolving through individual achievements that accumulate into species adaptation. She stretches in the warming sunlight, surveys territory that represents her life's work and achievement, and prepares for another day of survival challenges that test capabilities refined through years of mountain experience. The cycle continues, as it has for millions of years, as it will for millions more. The ghost of the cliffs endures, invisible except to those who know how to look, successful because evolution designed her perfectly for conditions that defeat almost everything else. Morning arrives again in the high places, and she greets it with the confidence of an apex predator who has mastered the art of being alive at the top of the world. The wheel of seasons turns with mechanical precision in the high Himalayas, indifferent to the struggles of individual animals but creating the rhythm that has sustained snow leopard populations for millions of years. As our female settles into her 5th year of territorial control, she embodies the intersection where individual survival meets species continuation, where personal achievement becomes evolutionary success. Her territory now spans 42 square kilometers of mountain terrain that she knows with the intimacy of a lover and the precision of a cartographer. Every granite outcrop, every hidden valley, every wind pattern and weather sign has been catalogued in memory systems that represent the accumulated wisdom of successful high-altitude predation. She is no longer just surviving. She is mastering an environment that kills most life forms within hours of exposure. The cubs from her most recent breeding cycle have reached 18 months of age, that critical threshold where maternal protection transitions to territorial independence. They represent her genetic investment in the future, carriers of adaptations refined through her own survival experiences and inherited from ancestral lines that stretch back to the Pleistocene epoch when ice sheets carved these mountains into their current configuration. Her daughter, the larger and more aggressive of the two surviving cubs, displays behavioral patterns that mirror her own territorial establishment phase. The young female shows preference for high-altitude hunting zones, demonstrates superior patience during stalking sequences, and exhibits the kind of calculated risk assessment that separates successful predators from those who become cautionary tales told in scent markings and scattered bones. The son shows different but equally valuable survival strategies. His approach to territorial challenges emphasizes diplomatic solutions over confrontation. His hunting techniques favor energy conservation over dramatic displays of athleticism, and his social intelligence suggests capabilities for the complex territorial negotiations that male snow leopards must master to achieve breeding success in landscapes where territorial females hold ultimate authority over reproductive access. Both cubs carry forward genetic combinations that represent millions of years of evolutionary refinement, but also novel adaptations that might prove crucial for species survival in mountain environments that climate change is modifying in ways that challenge traditional survival strategies. Each generation must adapt to conditions their parents never faced, while maintaining core capabilities that evolution tested across geological timescales. The territorial establishment process for dispersing cubs requires delicate balance between maternal guidance and independence development. Too much assistance prevents development of essential survival skills. Too little support during the transition period can result in mortality rates that eliminate promising genetic lines before they achieve reproductive success. Her daughter's territorial preferences lead toward the northeastern expansion zones where prey populations remain robust, but territorial competition requires confrontation with established predators whose capabilities represent unknown variables. Success depends on a combination of inherited abilities, learned skills, and luck factors that no amount of maternal preparation can guarantee. The son faces different challenges as male territorial establishment requires larger ranges, more complex social negotiations, and delayed reproductive access that tests survival capabilities over extended time periods. Male snow leopards typically require 3 to 4 years to achieve territorial establishment that permits breeding access, creating survival bottlenecks that eliminate most males before genetic contribution becomes possible. Her own reproductive future involves calculations that balance energy expenditure against declining physical capabilities and increasing territorial maintenance demands. Female snow leopards can remain reproductively active well into their teens, but reproductive success requires physical condition and territorial security that become progressively more difficult to maintain as age affects hunting efficiency and territorial defense capabilities. The breeding season approaches with atmospheric and chemical signals that trigger endocrine responses refined through millions of years of high-altitude reproduction. Her body chemistry shifts toward reproductive readiness, while her territorial behavior adapts to accommodate the temporary social tolerance required for successful mating in species, whose normal behavioral patterns emphasize individual isolation. Mate selection involves biochemical communication systems that evaluate genetic compatibility, territorial status, and physical condition through chemical signatures that provide more detailed information than visual assessment could achieve. Pheromone analysis operates like biological background, checking that influences reproductive decisions through processes that happen below conscious awareness, but determine genetic combinations that define future generations. The male who approaches her territory this season carries scent signatures that indicate successful territorial establishment, good hunting performance, and genetic markers that suggest compatibility with her own genetic profile. His territorial vocalizations demonstrate confidence balanced with appropriate caution, indicating social intelligence that recognizes the difference between breeding approach and territorial challenge. Their courtship follows protocols that balance reproductive necessity with survival requirements, in environments where extended social interaction creates vulnerability to environmental threats, prey scarcity, and territorial challenges from competitors who might exploit perceived weaknesses during reproductive distraction. The mating process itself represents temporary suspension of normal behavioral patterns that emphasize individual survival above all other considerations. Reproductive chemistry overrides territorial instincts and competitive responses that would normally prevent close contact between apex predators whose hunting strategies require defending resource access against all competitors. Post-mating territorial arrangements require negotiation of hunting ground access, den site security, and resource sharing that accommodates increased caloric requirements during pregnancy, while maintaining territorial boundaries that prevent conflict with neighboring snow leopards, whose own reproductive cycles create similar resource pressures. Pregnancy in high-altitude environments demands metabolic adaptations that challenge biological systems already operating at efficiency limits imposed by oxygen scarcity, temperature extremes, and nutritional constraints. Her hunting success rates must improve precisely when physical capabilities face increasing limitations from gestational energy demands. Den site selection involves geological knowledge, weather prediction, and security assessment that determines survival prospects for offspring who will spend their first months completely dependent on maternal protection in environments where exposure to cold, predators, or human discovery could result in total reproductive failure. The denning period requires hunting efficiency improvements that support both maternal nutrition and milk production, adequate for supporting rapid growth in cubs who must achieve minimum survival capabilities before their first winter. Energy balance calculations become critical as caloric input must support two biological systems operating at maximum demand levels. Birth in high-altitude environments occurs without medical support systems that lowland mammals might access during reproductive emergencies. Maternal survival and cub viability depend entirely on biological adaptations refined through natural selection processes that eliminated genetic lines unable to achieve reproductive success under extreme environmental conditions. The cubs emerge into world conditions that would kill most mammalian newborns within hours. But snow leopard adaptations include specialized physiological systems that maintain body temperature, support rapid development, and provide immunological protection adequate for survival in environments where bacterial and viral challenges compound environmental stresses. Early cub development follows patterns that balance rapid capability, acquisition with energy conservation, in organisms whose survival depends on achieving hunting competence before environmental conditions deteriorate beyond survival. Thresholds. Every developmental milestone represents biological investment that must produce capabilities justifying energy expenditure. Maternal education begins immediately as cubs learn through play behaviors that disguise survival training as entertainment. Wrestling teaches combat techniques, stalking games develop hunting skills, and climbing competitions build athletic capabilities essential for mountain navigation and threat avoidance. Education continues throughout dependency periods that extend longer than most feline species require. The cub's territorial education involves route memorization, landmark recognition, and hazard identification that creates mental maps supporting independent navigation through terrain where wrong turns can result in exposure to avalanche zones, cliff faces, or territorial boundaries defended by predators whose tolerance for intruders approaches zero. Weather prediction education teaches recognition of atmospheric conditions, pressure changes, and seasonal patterns that influence hunting success, shelter selection, and travel timing. Cubs must learn meteorological assessment capabilities that provide survival advantages during independent territorial establishment when maternal weather prediction support ends. Hunting instruction progresses from observation through participation to independent practice under maternal supervision that prevents fatal learning errors while ensuring skill development adequate for survival during independence. Each hunting lesson represents biological investment in genetic line continuation that must produce competent predators capable of territorial establishment. Social behavior education includes territorial communication protocols, threat assessment procedures, and conflict resolution strategies that enable survival in landscapes where misreading social signals or responding inappropriately to territorial challenges can result in injury or death that eliminates promising genetic contributions. Human avoidance training becomes increasingly important as human encroachment into traditional snow leopard territories creates survival challenges that genetic programming didn't anticipate. Cubs must learn recognition and response patterns for threats that evolutionary processes had no opportunity to address through natural selection. Conservation implications of successful reproduction extend beyond individual family groups to species-level survival calculations that depend on reproductive success rates, genetic diversity maintenance, and population distribution patterns. Each successful breeding cycle contributes to conservation outcomes that operate at landscape and regional scales. Climate change effects on high-altitude environments create novel challenges for reproductive success as temperature changes, precipitation pattern modifications, and vegetation community shifts affect prey populations, territorial carrying capacity, and seasonal resource availability. Future reproductive success requires adaptation to environmental conditions that historical survival strategies might not address adequately. The cub's genetic heritage includes adaptations from both parental lines that represent survival solutions tested across multiple generations of high-altitude reproduction. But genetic combination also produces novel capabilities that might prove essential for survival in environmental conditions that neither parent encountered during their own development. Maternal assessment of cub capabilities involves evaluation of hunting potential, territorial establishment prospects, and genetic quality indicators that influence investment decisions during resource allocation and education prioritization. Limited maternal resources require strategic distribution that maximizes reproductive success probability. Territory expansion considerations affect reproductive planning, as successful breeding increases resource demands, while territorial boundaries remain fixed by geographical features and neighboring predator territories. Population pressure from successful reproduction can force territorial modifications that affect entire regional predator distributions. The cubs approach independence with capabilities that represent successful integration of inherited adaptations, learned skills, and innovative responses to environmental challenges that required problem-solving abilities beyond programmed behavioral patterns. Each independent cub represents potential founder for new territorial lines that extend species distribution into previously unoccupied habitats. Her maternal investment concludes as territorial independence becomes biological necessity for cubs whose continued presence prevents new reproductive cycles, while creating resource competition that could compromise survival prospects for all family members. Independence represents graduation from maternal protection to individual survival responsibility. Territorial dispersal patterns influence genetic flow throughout regional snow leopard populations, as dispersing cubs establish territories that connect previously isolated breeding populations through gene exchange that maintains species, genetic diversity, and adaptation potential. Individual reproductive success contributes to species-level evolutionary processes. Post-reproductive territorial modifications accommodate reduced hunting requirements while maintaining territorial integrity against challenges from dispersing juveniles or expanding neighbors whose territorial ambitions might exploit perceived weaknesses in aging territorial holders. Territorial maintenance requires adaptation to changing physical capabilities. The seasonal cycle continues with variations that reflect accumulated experience, changing physical capabilities, and environmental modifications that require adaptive responses not covered in traditional survival strategies. Each year brings novel challenges that test survival systems against environmental conditions that never remain completely constant. Her territorial legacy includes environmental modifications from successful predation, cache site establishment, and territorial marking that influence habitat quality for future occupants. Individual territorial management creates landscape-level effects that persist beyond individual lifespans and contribute to ecosystem function. Knowledge transfer to dispersing cubs includes spatial information, behavioral strategies, and adaptive responses that represent cultural transmission of survival innovations that supplemented genetic inheritance with learned capabilities. Cultural evolution operates alongside genetic evolution in species capable of knowledge accumulation and transmission. The cycle prepares for continuation as reproductive capability persists, while territorial establishment remains secure and hunting efficiency maintains adequacy for survival and potential future reproductive investment. Each breeding cycle represents opportunity for genetic contribution to species adaptation and evolution. Regional population dynamics reflect cumulative effects of individual reproductive success across multiple territorial units that compose landscape-scale species distributions. Her reproductive contribution becomes component of population trends that determine conservation status and species survival prospects under changing environmental conditions. The mountain environment remains constant backdrop for life cycles that connect individual achievement with species continuation across temporal scales that exceed individual lifespans, but require individual success for collective survival. Personal survival becomes species survival through reproductive contribution to future generations. Future challenges include environmental changes that require adaptive responses, human encroachment that necessitates behavioral modifications, and resource availability fluctuations that test survival capabilities against conditions that might exceed historical experience ranges. Adaptation continues through individual survival and reproductive success. Her story represents a single thread in evolutionary tapestry that connects current snow leopard populations with ancestral forms that first adapted to high-altitude environments millions of years ago. Individual success contributes to species continuity that extends from geological past toward uncertain but potentially successful future. The cubs disappear into mountain landscape, carrying genetic and cultural heritage that represents her contribution to species adaptation and evolution. Their territorial establishment success will determine whether her reproductive investment produces founders for new breeding lines that expand species distribution and genetic diversity. Morning light illuminates granite peaks that have witnessed countless cycles of birth, growth, territorial establishment, reproduction, and generational succession. The mountains provide constant stage for evolutionary drama that plays out through individual survival stories that accumulate into species adaptation and continuation. She remains in territory that represents life achievement and genetic investment, preparing for potential future reproductive opportunities while maintaining territorial integrity that ensures continued survival in an environment that rewards success and eliminates failure with mechanical precision. The cycle continues, as it has for millions of years, as it will continue for millions more, through individual achievements that become species achievements, through reproductive contribution to genetic and cultural heritage that defines snow leopard adaptation to life at the top of the world.